Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to my medieval Valentine's Day special cooking party. We're starting off with the traditional getting dressed because I spent all of this morning actually preparing for this. Unfortunately, it took us longer to get the kitchen in order than I had hoped, but we are now all set up, so we are ready to go. So today's recipe is being brought to us from the Kingdom of Naples, which many of you might say the Kingdom of Naples. Yes, Naples in the Middle Ages was its own kingdom, and it was a powerful part of Italy. It was actually directly connected to Aragon because members of the Aragon royal court were actually the kings of, or of the royal family, were actually the kings of Naples. And so there were direct ties between Italy and the what would become Spain, the Iberian Peninsula in this era. So this cookbook from which we're working today is an anonymous collection of recipes from Naples. And you're going to see just how different Neapolitan cuisine is now versus then based on the cheesecake that we're going to be making today. And hopefully the cheesecake we make today is going to have much better outcomes than the sadly failed cheesecake we made last time. So I'm just getting dressed, therefore, in an Italian fashion from the 15th century. This is Florentine. I don't have any Neapolitan clothing from this era, although that is one of my dreams to have an ensemble from every part of 15th century Italy where the fashions were actually different to, illustrate those differences. But that is not where we're at right now. Ha, Susan, welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's cooking party, Valentine's Day. Are any of you doing anything special for Valentine's? We don't. We believe that romance is something that can be pursued throughout the whole year. It does not have to be pursued on only one day of the year. And,
I try to woo her every day.
he woos me every day. Yeah. So yeah, Hallmark. Oh darn it, Hallmark is not getting its money from us. For the most part, the modern version of Valentine's Day is a Hallmark invention. Although in the medieval era, by the 15th century, Valentine's Day had indeed become a celebration is perhaps too strong a word, but it at least had some of the customs with which we would now be familiar in terms of romantic exchanges of gifts and claiming that so and so is my Valentine. That is very much a 15th century tradition. So, I thought, well, some people, perhaps not everyone, in the West anyway, in Europe and the United States and other places that celebrate the modern version of Valentine's Day, will be out this evening. So we'll do a cooking show and we'll work through this recipe together for all of those who are at home looking for something more engaging to do, perhaps. But, we're doing food today. We're doing 15th century Italian food. And one of the questions from yesterday's medieval sewing party was about the traditional foods that would be given as Valentine's Day gifts. Because, of course, these days, there are a couple very, very quintessential Valentine's Day foodstuffs. Chocolate is amongst them. Of course, chocolate did not exist in Europe in the 15th century. Chocolate comes from Mexico, and it did not exist even in Mexico in the version that we now know chocolate today, right? The version that the Mexicans had was a beverage that was savory and not sweet, and was basically thick, hot cocoa mixed with red chili pepper. So nothing like we understand it. Most people who have tried, original Aztec style hot chocolate don't like it because without sugar, it's like coffee basically, but with chili peppers in it. So yeah, no chocolate in the Middle Ages in Europe, no sweet chocolate anywhere in the Middle Ages, as far as we can tell. But what they did exchange was not foodstuffs. Foodstuffs don't seem to have been a gift of particularly tied with Valentine's Day or with romantic exchanges. At least I haven't found any food references to gifts that are appropriate to exchange between lovers. Instead, it was more lasting and endurable items rather than consumables, right? So typical gifts that would be exchanged between lovers were rings, garters, because of course medieval stockings are, for men and women, are held up by garters. There was no elastic fabric in this era. And belts, shoes, combs were exchanged, which is why we have so many combs from the Middle Ages that are actually carved with lovers' themes. So,
Questions and such.
okay, questions.
What's the tapestry?
This tapestry behind me is actually, let me see, On y soit qui mal y pense. So this is a tapestry from the, as far as I know, from the chapter house of the Order of the Garter from the 15th century. And so you can see the garter there, and On y soit qui mal y pense. That's the motto of the garter, and also the motto of the English royal family. So you've got here stags holding that, and I'm not certain whose arms those are, but this is a replica of a 15th century tapestry. Yeah.
Naples fashion during King Ferrante's reign? Question mark.
Yes. So the dating of today's cookbook, it's referred to as the Anonymous Neapolitan Recipe Collection because it is anonymous. It's not attributed anywhere, but it does share a lot of recipes, common recipes with other 15th century Italian cookbooks. So it's very clearly part of a greater tradition, but there are some unique recipes that show very clear ties with either the Catalan court and also with Aragon. So that would have been during the reign of King Ferrante, possibly. So it's not, they weren't able, there's nothing in it that can date it to a very specific date, but it seems to be mid 15th century or second half of the 15th century in Italy. So there are some innovations, for instance, new techniques that are mentioned that aren't mentioned in earlier Italian works, right? So, yep.
And you'll want to address this. There was no sugar in the medieval.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. There was absolutely sugar in medieval Europe. There wasn't sugar in the New World, though. Sugar is an old world plant. Sugar cane comes from Indonesia, basically. It comes from the islands in the southern part of Asia, and then it's kind of spread from there going outward to, I think, from Polynesia, actually. And then it spread outward from there, kind of westward, but it didn't spread eastward to the Americas. So the Americas didn't have sugar. They had other things, other ways possibly to make things sweet. Honey, for instance, but they didn't have sugar. Medieval Europe did have sugar, and today's recipe actually involves what by 15th century standards would have been a pretty large amount of sugar, but it was a luxury good, right? There were sugar plantations in Sicily and in Cyprus by the 15th century, but they're not mass producing large amounts of sugar, right? So you really do have, sorry, this is going to make some rustling. So sugar was a luxury item in medieval Europe. So it's not that there was no sugar. There was absolutely sugar. It just was a luxury good. Right. So that is why an item like the one we're making today, a cheesecake like the cheesecake we're making today, would have been considered an occasional treat for special occasions, or it would have been, if in the upper, in the papal court, for instance, or in the court of the King of Naples, it would have been something only meant for the really well-heeled. So yeah, there was sugar. It just was a luxury good, and so not used in large quantities. In fact, you can tell in Europe when people, it's very obvious in the skeletal record when Europeans get sugar in large quantities because our teeth start rotting. Right? That's you can tell, and that happens starting in about the 16th century, because the Portuguese in the 15th century, the Portuguese set up massive sugar plantations on the Azores and Madeira, the islands that they've colonized off of the east coast of Africa, and then they refer to it as white gold, and that's one of the reasons that Portugal is so ascendant in the 15th and 16th centuries and so powerful. It's because of its white gold, but that also makes sugar a lot more available, unfortunately, for all of us Westerners, for all of us Europeans, right? But it really picks up once the Caribbean is basically opened up and colonized, and the sugar plantations are built there, because that's where sugar starts, being mass produced. And by the 18th century, the teeth of European and then the colonists, also skeletons, are in pretty rough shape. Okay. I am all dressed for cooking. I'm wearing a gamora, or actually this is technically a kota because it's made out of not just wool, it's made out of a brocade, right? But I'm not wearing an overgown because I'm going to be cooking. Now, we do have some evidence in the 15th century. We have actually plenty of evidence that the lady of the house, moi, would have overseen the cooking in a great household. So even in the Palazzo of the Medici, Clarice Orsini, who would become Clarice de Medici, she would have overseen the kitchen in the sense of she would have collaborated with her head cook to design menus. And in some cases, we have evidence of the lady of the house personally seeing to the creation, the concoction, the baking and the cooking of dishes for her husband or her sons, especially if they're away. So we know, for example, that Margherita Dattini in the early 15th century, she actually makes a couple of roasts for her husband who's out at their country estate and has them sent to him and says, I have made these myself to ensure that they are to your taste. So we know that even though these ladies by the 15th century, many of them were very rich, were very affluent, we know that they still sometimes took a personal hand in making special dishes for their loved ones, usually for the immediate members of their family, right? They certainly wouldn't have cooked for a grand feast, but making a special dish for their husband or their son, or maybe their father, right? That is something that we do document. We have documentation for the great ladies doing that as well. Okay, any questions? Today we're working from a book that I can, yes.
You ever play Witcher 3 or Kingdom Come Deliverance?
Have I ever played Witcher 3 or Kingdom Come Deliverance? I have not played, I don't really play video games because for me, I feel like I'm wasting my life. I'd rather do the living history stuff. I have reviewed the clothing in Kingdom Come because as part of my exploration of medieval material culture. And so if you're asking what I think about the medieval clothing depicted in those games, Witcher, I haven't really looked at. Kingdom Come Deliverance, I did a thorough review on the costumes in that. It's on under my live stream recordings. You can watch that. Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 and Deliverance 2 I have reviewed. Deliverance 2 is better. It's not perfect. There's still some, like the silhouettes of the men are completely wrong. They don't have the pigeon chest with the narrow waist that they're supposed to have, because I suspect the creators thought that would make them look too feminine, even though that was the masculine silhouette for the 14th, second half of the 14th and first half of the 15th century for manly men, the knights, the men who are out there on the battlefield slaying each other. Yeah, their silhouette was curvy. The silhouette for men in Italy, even going up to the end of the 15th century, the silhouette was pigeon chest going into a narrow waist and narrow hips. So that's how men should have looked. They shouldn't have looked like they had big, giant football padded shoulders. Yeah.
And that was from Dead Pixel 614.
Dead Pixel?
Dead Pixel.
Dead Pixel. Dead Pixel 614. Thank you for that question, Dead Pixel.
And then Wendy Voss 4198 says, hi, I enjoy your medieval talks.
Thank you, Wendy. Welcome to the community. Okay, so today we're going to be making, yes?
Dead Pixel said, thank you, I'll look it up. Sorry for throwing your flow off.
Oh no, it's okay. It's a live stream, right? My live streams go a little wild, so it's okay. I accept left field questions. It's fine. Right, so today we're going to be working from, and this is a book you can get for yourself. I highly recommend it. I know it's not mirrored, so you can't necessarily read that. It says The Neapolitan Recipe Collection. And this is by a food historian, a historical cook scholar, historical culinary scholar, Terence Scully. He has a lot of really excellent publications. Well, a lot. He has several. What's a lot for medieval cookery? He's a lot for medieval cookery. I recommend you look him up and check out some of his other works. What I like about the Neapolitan Recipe Collection is, one, he publishes a transcription of the recipes in the original Italian. And then he provides a section with comments on each of the recipes, and then he has a translation at the back. Me, as a linguist, I love this because I can just look right at the original Italian or the transcription of the original Italian and work straight from it. Not everyone, however, understands 15th century dialects of 15th century Italians, hence the translations are really useful for that. Also, the fact that he provides the transcription of the original Italian means that you can go back and check against the original in case something sounds a little funky. Right. I'm a professional translator, so it's kind of what I do just by habit. But yeah, I really appreciate this book for that reason. So the Neapolitan recipe collection, you can get it at Barnes. You used to be able to get it at Barnes and Noble. Check Abe Books, check Biblio. There's different spots. Do not purchase it from Amazon if you can avoid it. Jeff Bezos is a mega rich asshole who has not paid his fair share of taxes to earn the amount of money he has while using all the infrastructure that is tax funded. So fuck Jeff Bezos, fuck Amazon, shop elsewhere. This has been your anti-sponsor, your anti-advertisement for the day. Anyway, off of my soapbox. So we're going to be working from this today. Now, I've already done a bunch of work, a bunch of prep work. So one of the complications of a medieval recipe or any historical recipe are measurements, are weights and measurements. Now, sometimes we are lucky with medieval recipes in that they don't contain any weights or measurements. So you don't have to worry about conversions. Therefore, you though have to just kind of imagine what the various ratios of the ingredients are. But the Neapolitan recipe collection is different. It has many recipes, hear me out everyone, that actually contain weights and measures. Okay, but what's the problem with that? What's the problem with a 15th century source talking about weights and measures? So some of you, yes?
Oh, did you want me to answer?
Yeah. So one of the things people don't realize or don't even think about, if they thought about it, they probably would realize it, but most people don't. Consider the fact that weights and measures have changed drastically over the centuries. And even if we're using the same words, ounces, pounds, even cups, right? That doesn't mean that it's the same ounce and the same pound and the same cup that we now use. So I had to do a bunch of prep work to interpret this recipe by trying to ascertain how much the various measurements were in 15th century Naples, because Italy was not a country in the 15th century. Italy didn't become a country, again, I guess you count the Roman Empire as a country. Since the Roman Empire, Italy didn't become a country again until 1860s, right? The unification of Italy. And so every polity on the Italian peninsula in the 15th century had different weights and measures. And there's even, I found a 1340 manual of commercial and dealings by a merchant from Florence who wrote hundreds of pages about how to conduct business across the Italian peninsula. He was a spice dealer, and he actually provided, I just found it this morning, he actually provides detailed conversions for every city to Florence. It is, he must have been on the spectrum. It is such a detailed work. Only someone who is, really into the depth of the details could undertake this kind of accomplishment. So, but what that means is that you can't just say, well, it's a pound, so that's this in Florence, so it must be that in Naples. And in some cases, the discrepancies between the measurements are immense. So I did my best to try to ascertain how much these measurements that are mentioned in this recipe would be in 15th century Naples and what that would convert to today's measurement. So I've pre-measured most things for that reason. Maybe next time I'll live stream the process of figuring out these measurements so you can watch me go, a Florentine, a Neapolitan pound is 320 grams, but it calls for half a pound in this recipe, but we're only doing 1/4 of the recipe, right? Yeah, because we're not making the full recipe today. We're making a fourth. I'm scaling it down to 1/4 of the recipe because it's just two of us here. And if it doesn't turn out well, then I don't want to have wasted 15 eggs on something that doesn't turn out well. Yeah. Okay. Any questions before we dive in? So the process is going to be, I'm going to go ahead and read the recipe, the translation of the recipe. I can, if you want, if you all want, I can read you the recipe in the original Italian. Italian is one of my languages. So would you like me to read it to you in the original Italian? It's a paragraph. It's not terribly long. For most of you, you wouldn't, I guess, probably be able to understand it, but maybe some of you could. And then we will go through step by step and discuss some of the challenges of the recipe, and then we will dive into it. So what we're making today is called a torta bianca. I think that's the original. Let me check in the original. Yeah, torta bianca, a white torta, a white pie, basically. And
Would kitties eat it if it was yucky?
no, probably not. If the kitties probably would not. No. Our cats wouldn't. So our spoiled little house cats, our rescue babies, would not eat it if it was yucky. But you know who would eat it? I bet our apartment building kitties would eat it, probably. We live in we're renting a vacation apartment in this little apartment building in Daegu, South Korea, and we have apartment building kitties. Basically, they're outdoor cats that live around on the base of our apartment, and everyone takes part in feeding them and caring for them. And so our little picky asshole cats, we give them the best quality food, and a lot of it they end up not liking. So the outdoor kitties get it. So I bet the outdoor kitties would probably actually, like they would like whatever it is that we fail at making, probably. But our picky little babies wouldn't. Okay, so to make a white torta. So torta is a word that can be translated a couple of different ways. As a translator, one of the tricks in translation is you have to understand the concept underlying the words and understand what the equivalent concept would be in the language into which you are translating it. It's not just a question of word, it's not a word substitution game. Unfortunately, a lot of people who do these translations of historical texts, they're approaching it from the perspective not of a translator, but of a cook or a sewist or a costume historian. So they're not actually thinking like a translator, which is to say equivalent language concepts. They're thinking in terms of word substitution. So I might fix some of the translation along the way. Okay, so to make a white tort, get 10 or 12 eggs, as you prefer, beat them thoroughly, cut up a small 1.5 pounds of new cheese, then grind it with 1/2 pound of fine sugar, a further 1/2 ounce of peeled ginger, 1/2 pound of lard or butter, and a small foglietta of milk. Then mix the milk, eggs, cheese, sugar, ginger, and butter thoroughly together. And note that to make it whiter, there should be 15 egg whites. Then make thin pastry on the bottom of the pan, put this mixture on it, and cook it slowly over a moderate fire. When it is almost done, give it a little color on top with a hotter fire. When it looks done, take it out and put rose water and sugar on top and serve. And there's a little note that was added afterwards. Note that when it is done, the top of this pie should be sprinkled with an egg yolk beaten with saffron, and then put on plenty of well-ground sugar. Okay. Now I've opened questions. Okay, what's a foglietta? Yes, we're going to get there. Okay, fantastic. So there's this recipe. I love this recipe for many reasons. One, it actually gets referenced later as a base recipe that can then be used to make more exquisite or more sophisticated versions of the tort. So consider this torta bianca is basically like your base cheesecake recipe, and then there's different things that can be done with it to make it more interesting. For instance, when elderberry trees, and we were talking about elderberry in my posts recently as a way to make your hair curl, when the elderberry trees blossom, you actually take the elderberry blossoms, you chop them up, and you mix them into this, and then you get sambukad, an elderberry cheesecake, a recipe for which is mentioned in multiple sources across 14th and 15th century Europe, and then even into the 16th century. So this bianca torta actually binds culturally and culinarily, ties Italy to other parts of Europe, which I love that connectivity. Everyone's always talking about how isolated everyone was in medieval Europe, but that's just not true. And recipes like that prove that. The other thing I love about this recipe is that it actually provides quantities. So excited about the quantities. Much less guesswork involved, much more likely to arrive at a dish that approximates what the Neapolitani of the 15th century actually would have eaten themselves, right? Yeah, and the guesswork can be fun, right? That's part of the creativity, but sometimes I just want to know what it is they ate.
So Laser Dim says, "You seem so passionate and excited. When did you begin cooking?"
Ah, yeah. Thank you, Laserdin. Thank you, Laserdin, for that
Dim.
compliment. Dim? Really?
Like
Okay.
dim laser,
Dim laser. Got it.
like our laser pointer for the kitties.
Right. Is dimming fast, rapidly as the better. Uh, could you check the plug on the outer ring? It keeps flickering. It's either possessed by a ghost or you just check to see if the plug is actually plugged firmly in. Right. I've been cooking. So food in my family is a religion. Some of you know my origin story, but in a nutshell, food in my family is a religion. My great grandmother hand wrote cookbooks of family recipes. We still have them in notebooks in this gorgeous Palmer penmanship. I've been cooking since I was steady enough to stand on a chair next to my father while he cooked and baked. And of course, at first he was humoring me, right? He was like, "Oh, go ahead, little Rachel, mix this. Go ahead, you can crack the egg in, right?" But eventually, I graduated to more advanced versions of more advanced techniques, and so yeah, I feel like I've been cooking my whole life, and I love good food, and I love homemade food, and I like food that's not filled with garbage. And medieval living history means I also want to explore how to make the food in that era as well. So I love food from all eras, from all cultures. One of the reasons I love to travel the world is to taste the way people eat in other places. Like we just got back from Thailand. Northern Thailand in Chiang Mai, where we took a traditional Lana cooking class that involved using, it was all slow food, using only mortars and pestles and knives and cooking over the coals on a clay stove, right? So, yeah, definitely. I'm very passionate about food, but I'm very passionate about sharing creativity and knowledge in general. Okay, so 10 or 12 eggs as you prefer and beat them thoroughly. So that's the first step. And that makes sense. You want your eggs to be beaten before you mix anything else in so that the eggs become one thing and the egg whites are broken up and the egg yolks are broken up. And that's going to make a much more even and uniform dish. And that's reflected in modern cheesecake recipes as well. That in good ones anyway, that you should beat your eggs first before adding them into the cheese, right? Okay, then it says cut up small a pound and a half of new cheese. Okay, new cheese. What is new cheese? New cheese could mean a lot of different things. It could mean fresh cheese or cream cheese, which is what we're going to be using today. It does say to cut it up small though, so I suspect that they're talking more like a farmer's cheese, what we would call a farmer's cheese. Unfortunately, I don't have access to a farmer's cheese right now, but I can make my own cream cheese. I'm going to look into making my own farmer's cheese, actually. We're in South Korea, so our cheese selection is very limited. Farmer's cheese is not something I can get at my local Costco or any other store, actually. So I'm going to look into making it. It shouldn't be that hard, I don't think. But they want you to cut it up. They want you to cut up a pound and a half small. So a new cheese it's going to have a couple of characteristics. A new cheese is not going to have a strong flavor. It's going to be a relatively mild cheese. It's going to be softer. It's not going to be very salty because it's new. So it's going to be less concentrated because one of the things that happens as cheese ages is that moisture evaporates and so it contracts. And also the salt crystals then form as part of the process of aging, right? So the flavor gets nuttier and more intense with time. So a new cheese is one of the two of the key characteristics of a new cheese are going to be that it's going to be moister and that it's going to be more mild. So in selecting a new cheese, that is something you need to keep in mind when you are reading a recipe like this. Now, some of you know, I just discovered a 15th century cheese manual, by which I mean a book composed in the 15th century by a 15th century traveler sent on basically a mission to discover cheeses throughout Europe and document them by the Duke of Savoy. And he actually traveled through Germany and France and up to England and all around Italy. Of course, Italy wasn't Italy at the time, but the Italian peninsula. And he documented the cheeses that he encountered. He described their texture, their color, how they looked. He described their flavor. He describes how to make butter. He even talks about how to make cheese. And this amazing book is only available either in the original Latin, because he composed it in Latin, which makes it a 15th century macaronic Latin, or there was one German translation that I found. It is in the Wellcome Library in London. It is not available digitally, but I do have a contact out there. Ray, if you're watching, I appreciate you. Or Kyle, sorry, Kyle, if you're out there, I appreciate you. And he's able to go to the library and take pictures of this book for me, of the German translation, because German's one of my languages. So I'm hoping to get some more information about Italian cheeses very shortly, based on actual 15th century writers. So that's very exciting. Questions?
19 says, amazing videos always. Also, you are so very attractive.
Oh, thank you.
And Susanette says, with saffron and sugar, this torta bianca is expensive.
Yes. Yeah. So exactly. So the question is, with the sugar and with the saffron and the rose water, is this torta bianca expensive? It is. This is a luxury item. The second you have sugar in this quantity, and we'll get to that quantity in a moment, this is a luxury item. This is not something people are going to be enjoying. Peasants on the lower end of the peasants is the wrong word. People on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum would not get to enjoy something like this. Maybe once a year, maybe at Christmas, right? At the special Christmas feast, they might get a special treat like this. But otherwise, this sugar and saffron, rose water, those are all very expensive ingredients. The cheese, eggs, those are common. Butter, not so expensive, especially not in Italy. But the other components, yeah, it is definitely an expensive dish. Okay, so we've got this pound and a half. Was there another question?
Yeah, but Susan, we won't go into that one.
Yeah. Well,
Do you want to hear the question? Did
Yeah.
King Ferrante of Naples really have a room with dressed dead bodies of traitors in it?
oh, I'm not certain. Yeah, I'm not as familiar with King Ferrante's, the life and times of King Ferrante himself. I'm familiar with the material culture, so I can't address that. We have been to Naples, and we have been to one of the royal crypts, where they have actually royal clothing from some of the royal family of 15th century Naples. Yeah, which is interesting too. Okay, so let's get back to it. 10 or 12 eggs, beat them thoroughly, cut up small, 1.5 pounds of new cheese, and then grind it with 1/2 pound of fine sugar. So the food processor par excellence of the Middle Ages is the mortar and pestle. Now, this is a granite mortar and pestle. This is actually an Asian style. Mortars, and it's small. Mortars and pestles in medieval Europe were big. They were really big. They were like the mortar was a giant bucket, basically, a giant heavy-duty bucket, often made of turned wood, sometimes made of brass or bronze. And then the pestle was basically like a boat oar with a rounded end, right? So that grinding things in a medieval mortar and pestle is actually relatively easy, because you can really get the full weight of your body to bear. And there would have, in a kitchen, in a well-heeled kitchen like this one, there probably would have been one or two people whose sole job was to grind stuff in the mortar and pestle. They were basically a human food processor. So we shall be using the food processor of the 15th century, the mortar and pestle. Sadly, I don't have a replica of a 15th century Italian one. If any of you are wood turners out there, I know Takeda's talked about making me one, or if any of you are casters and you would like to make one of these amazing cast versions, reach out to me. Let's chat. In the meanwhile, we'll be using this small one. Now, the thing is that it's going to be really easy to grind my cheese in the mortar and pestle because it's soft. But one of the things you'll notice is it says to cut up your 1.5 pounds of cheese into small pieces. And that is typical mortar and pestle technique. Before you put anything in your mortar and pestle, chop it up small first, and then put it in the mortar and pestle, and you will save yourself so much work, right? The knife and the mortar and pestle are together the ultimate food processing team in a pre-modern kitchen. And really, that's all you need. It really is. Now, you might need different kinds of knives, and honestly, we're gonna be looking into getting 2 giant cleavers after we use them at our traditional Lana Thai cuisine cooking course to actually chop pork belly into minced meat. It was so much fun, right? Really heavy cleavers. So this is not a heavy cleaver, but knife and mortar and pestle, that's all you need for food processing in the medieval kitchen. Yes, they started inventing other gadgets gradually by the 16th century. An Italian kitchen is basically, it looks like a pampered chef party without any plastic items in it, but you don't actually need all of that. Those are just nice to have, right? And in this era, in the mid-15th century, based on the way things are described as being processed, it seems that it is still knife and mortar and pestle as your primary food processing tools. So we'll be grinding that with the sugar. So this also reflects the modern cheesecake technique, right? That you mix a fat and your sugar together. Here, instead of mixing the butter and sugar together, we're mixing the cheese and the sugar together, right, in the mortar and pestle. And that half a pound of sugar, so we're a half pound, so 1 pound, as far as we can tell, 1 pound in Naples in the 15th century was 12 ounces. They didn't have 16-ounce pounds, they had 12-ounce pounds. And 1 pound would have been about 320 grams by modern standards. So half a pound is 160 grams, right? But I'm doing this by 1/4 because I want to test it out before I dedicate 15 eggs to a recipe. And where did we write that down? Right. So that's going to be 40 grams of sugar, which looks like about this. So let's talk about sugar for a moment, shall we? Sugar, some people say, wait, they had white sugar in the Middle Ages? Yes, white sugar was the sugar of preference. And they did this by refining it. They literally, so the way they made sugar is they would crush the sugar cane. If you've never seen sugar cane, it looks kind of like bamboo, basically. It's a grass. It's a big grass. It's a big sweet grass. And they crush it, and then they extract the juice out of it, and then they pour the juice or they cook the juice, and then they pour the juice into the cooked down syrupy juice into the mold. And then basically the mold is like a cone, and there's a jar that goes beneath it, the molasses jar, although they didn't really have what we would recognize as molasses. And then the brown part, the molasses, drips out. And then it can go through that process several times, right? Until you end up with really refined sugar. So there are different degrees of refined sugar, which is why some of the recipes actually call for white sugar specifically. But for the most part, when you see sugar depicted in medieval sources, like Taquinem Sanitatis, for instance, it's shown as a white cone because it comes out of that mold. And so you would actually buy it. It would come to your household as a hard cone. And someone would actually have to shave it and pound it into this fine sugar. Now, it's naturally granulated in the cone, the way they made it, but it's just been packed together. So it either needs to be shaved or it needs to be ground down in some other way. So that is, yes, they had white sugar. Molasses, it was a waste product. It was, as far as I can tell, it was not consumed or used in any way. And one of the reasons might be that the molasses that they were getting off of the sugar was so bitter that it was unpalatable. There's some sources that suggest that it was used in medical and medicinal applications, so medicines. Like treacle, there's a 15th or 14th century English word treacle, which seems that it might be the molasses, but it's only ever used in medicinal applications in very small quantities because it's bitter. It was very bitter. The molasses we have is the result of a later process in the Industrial Revolution that allowed it to become sweet. And I've read something about centrifuging and something about adding sulfur, but I haven't looked more deeply into that because I didn't care so much because it's just not a thing in the Middle Ages. So what was called treacle or black treacle seems to have been the molasses of the sugar, the brown part of the sugar, the brown liquid from the sugar, and it was bitter, so it was only, and very, very pungent, and so it was only used in medicinal applications. Yeah. Okay, so white sugar, absolutely a thing, still a luxury item though. And to be honest, this is a lot of sugar, right? This is not a small amount, especially for 3 eggs. So we've got our sugar. We've got a 1/2 ounce of peeled ginger, and an ounce, we calculate, this means we actually end up with about 4 grams of ginger, fresh ginger. Yes, they had fresh ginger in Europe, especially Southern Europe. Apparently, sailors, especially Arab sailors, Arab traders, would actually sail with fresh ginger on their long voyages, and they would consume the ginger as a way to fight scurvy and stay healthy because it's lots of micronutrients here. So it is absolutely possible to keep ginger fresh. You just have to keep it in water. It's a root. It will be fine, and it's a marsh plant. So as long as you keep it in water, it will stay good for a long time. So it is absolutely possible to transport fresh ginger. I imagine they could have even transported it in wet straw, right? So it is absolutely possible to actually transport fresh ginger, and apparently they were definitely getting fresh ginger in Italy. They were also getting dried, but I suspect, based on the fact that there's so much of it here, that we've got the original recipe calls for 1/2 ounce of ginger, that it's fresh ginger, especially because it says peeled ginger, right? You can't peel dried ginger. It's not going to work. So the fact that it has to be peeled ginger tells me, it indicates to me it's probably fresh. So that's going to give us a very bright color. Bright flavor, but it's also going to contribute a little bit of heat, a little bit of spice, right? So it's going to give this a little bit of edge, or just a little bit, not a lot, because honestly, half an ounce of ginger in the original recipe, so an ounce, we calculated an ounce as being about 26 grams, right? So an ounce was about 26 grams. So, half an ounce is 13 grams. 13 grams to 12 or 10 or 12 eggs. It's not a lot, but it's enough to just make it a little bit bright, right? It's kind of about the amount you would put in a pumpkin pie, honestly. Okay, any questions, Hanson? Not yet. Great. Okay.
Although you should say, if you post questions, we will.
Oh yeah, if you have questions, pop them in the live chat. We will absolutely try to answer them. And of course, if you're enjoying, don't forget to double tap that screen and consider subscribing if you would like to see more such entertainment from edutainment from the creative Contessa. Okay, so we've got half a pound of lard or butter, and that is a very common set of substitutions, lard or butter. So lard, of course, has a completely different flavor profile from butter. It's going to give you a very different product. But it's very interesting that in this recipe, in this culture, in this palette, it doesn't seem to matter because it says lard or butter, whatever you prefer. Well, I prefer butter. I prefer lard in certain applications, but I generally, in something like this, I'm definitely going to want butter. And so we have yummy, yummy, yummy Kerrygold butter. Kerrygold for the win. And half a pound, that translates in our recipe. So again, a pound is 320 grams in Naples in this era. Half a pound would therefore be 160. We're scaling the recipe down. So we have 40, and actually this is our 40 grams of butter. This is actually the butter for our pie crust, which we'll talk about in a moment, for our pastry. Okay. Then we have a small foglietta of milk. So a foglietta, there's a whole bunch of liquid measures from all across 15th century Italy that are completely different to ours. Foglietta is basically a wine flask, apparently, and it comes down to about, I did this measurement, there was my conversions. Okay, so it seems that 2 liters equals 4 foglietta. So we are doing, so that means that 1 foglietta would be 500 milliliters, right? But we are, of course, scaling this down. So we've got 125 milliliters of milk right here, regular old milk. Now, I'm going to bet that somewhere it says that, in fact, I know there is a version of this recipe for Lenten days, for the days of fasting, which were numerous in the Middle Ages. I think we calculated it out to be like 120 days on the medieval calendar or more where you weren't supposed to eat meat or most animal products. So this recipe contains butter and eggs, which were animal products. And so the substitutions for that would be almond milk, and nothing for the butter or lard, maybe olive oil. Yeah. So we've got our quarter of a small foglietta of milk. And then mix the milk, eggs, cheese, sugar, ginger, and butter thoroughly together. But what's interesting is that seems a little redundant because I went and looked at the original Italian. And the original Italian really implies, okay, that's where it comes in. So here's the thing. So there's 2 steps of mixing, or kind of two main steps of mixing, and then sub steps for the second part. So the first thing we mix, we get the 10 or 12 eggs, as we prefer, and we mix it together. I'm going to go with 10 eggs and the scaled down version of that, because 12 eggs will make it a little more eggy. 10 eggs will make it more cheesy. And I prefer to err on the side of cheesy. And it wouldn't surprise me if that is what this is implying, right? That as you prefer, understanding that more eggs equals more eggy, fewer eggs equals more cheesy. What's your preference? My preference is always for more cheesy. So we're going to go with the 10 eggs scaled down to a quarter. So that's going to be 2 eggs. Beat them thoroughly, right? And that's separate. Beat them thoroughly. Because then it says, cut up a small 1.5 pounds of new cheese, grind it, therefore in the mortar and pestle, with your sugar, with your ginger, and with the butter, and then with the milk. And that's the way it reads in the Italian is you do one, then the other, then the other, then the other, right? But I'm going to make a modification there because I'm going to go ahead and pound our ginger first, even though that's not stated, it just says to peel it, because putting the liquid in there, the milk in there and making it liquidy and then adding the ginger and trying to pound the ginger out with all that liquid, it's going to be a bit nightmarish. So this could be a case of they assume you know that you should peel and pre-pound your ginger, right? There's a lot of assumptions that come in these recipes. One, that you've already tried it, right? You're not coming at this cookbook with no idea about the dish itself. You've had the dish already. So this is just the instructions on how to make something that you already know. The other thing is that, it assumes that you would understand things like pre-preparing your spices. Like they don't have to tell you to grind your ginger to grind your ginger or grind your cinnamon or grind your grains of paradise. You should know that that is how it happens. So I'm going to assume then, for the sake of maximum flavorfulness and also understanding what I do from having read hundreds of other recipes, that we should pound this in the mortar and grind it down fine first. So we'll actually probably do that the very first thing. So basically in the mortar, we do our cheese, we do our sugar, we do our peeled ginger, we do our butter, and we do our milk. And then it says, mix together the milk, eggs, cheese, sugar, ginger, and butter thoroughly, right? So you mix those two mixtures so that it is thoroughly mixed, right? And again, this sounds just like a modern cheesecake recipe in so many ways. And then it says, now this is a torta bianca, so that literally means a white torte, right? So then it says, and note that to make it whiter, if you're really going for a color theme, right? You want it white, there should be 15 egg whites instead of the yolk. So if you're going for a feast that has a color theme, you want to serve a white feast, for instance, and that is occasionally something that happened in the 15th and 16th century. If you want a white feast, then just don't use the egg yolks. Just egg whites. It's going to change the flavor. It's obviously going to have a lot less fat if you take out all of the egg yolks, but it's also going to change the texture because egg yolks contain lecithin, which literally makes things silky and creamy, right? That's one of the reasons that egg yolks make such a wonderful sauce binder, because of the lecithin. So if you remove the egg yolks, it's not just going to change the color, it's also going to change the texture. So just keep that in mind. Also the flavors, because fat is a flavor enhancer, so protein is not so much a flavor enhancer. So by removing all the egg yolks, the flavors will be less prominent. So the ginger will be less prominent, etc. It will have a less strong flavor. Okay, then it says, make a thin pastry on the bottom of the pan. Again, I've read recently someone from England, an English historian, who claimed that there were no pie pans in the Middle Ages, and that's just not true. The Italians absolutely had pie pans. They had torte pans, and they looked something like this, right? And they seem to have been made out of clay. They seem to have been ceramic. By the 16th century, they're definitely metal torta pans. I haven't found evidence of metal ones in the 15th century. If you have evidence of metal torta pans in the 15th century, do let me know. Okay, so it says make a thin pastry on the bottom of the pan, put this mixture in it, cook it slowly over a moderate fire, right? Okay, so that's our basic recipe. Any questions before we dive right in?
One person that I just deleted from our viewership.
Okay.
Screw them. You're stupid. And Owie TF Studio said hi.
Hello. What studio? Owie. Owie TF Studios. Welcome. Thank you for joining my medieval Valentine's Day cooking show. Okay, so actually the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do our pastry. And that's because I want it to set and absorb fully. I want the dough to fully hydrate while we make the rest of the thing. So pastries, there are not any really clear 100% excellently detailed recipes for pastry, for torte pastry in the Middle Ages, unfortunately. We have, however, a bunch of different recipes for pies or tortes or cakes. Cakes, not so much. Cake had a different meaning in the 15th century, that contain hints as to how they could have been made. And there are multiple ways. There are different combinations of ingredients. This recipe does not provide any details on the pastry that should go on the bottom of the pan. So I'm going to go based on sort of my favorite combination of ingredients from 15th century Italian and French sources. And that basically is whereby, what did I do with the flour?
You didn't ask for flour.
But I put the flour out somewhere. Oh, there it is. Haha. Okay, where you have flour and you have an egg and you have butter, and you add water and you mix that all together. So, but the way pastry seems to have been made in the Middle Ages is not like modern pastry dough. Those of you who've made modern pie dough, specifically that kind of pastry dough, right? You're used to taking the flour and cutting cold butter, cold fat into the flour and then binding it with water. And that creates a very flaky, light, and delightfully buttery pastry that just melts in your mouth, right? And I love that kind of pastry dough, but that does not seem to be the way medieval dough was made, because they didn't have pastry cutters. They didn't really have ways to keep butter so cold that it was hard. And, they just didn't have that way of cutting fat into flour, short of taking two knives and, doing that knife trick. But I've never seen any evidence of that as a technique. What I have seen evidence of, however, from the sort of putting together the collage of pastry dough instructions from a variety of different recipes, is that they would melt the butter and water together, mix that, melt once it's melted, and then add that to the flour. Mix that together, add the egg, mix that in if you're using egg, and then add all of those liquids to the flour together. Now, this is going to create a dough that is less flaky and more chewy. And that's intentional. These doughs are not this pastry dough in this era isn't necessarily the kind that's just going to flake apart at the lightest touch. It's actually intended to be, in this case, a pie plate liner. And it's expected to have a little more heft to it, right? Which our modern pastry doesn't have to withstand that, because the kind of cooking that this would undergo is a little bit less refined and less subtle than a modern oven, because you can't get quite the precision of temperature control in a medieval cooking situation, because you'll notice there's no talk about an oven here, right? And that's something else that I didn't mention, but I should. It says cook it slowly over a moderate fire. That's not an oven. Ovens don't have fires in them in the Middle Ages. Ovens in the Middle Ages are basically giant, little brick houses with a shelf in them. And you build a fire in the oven, heat the whole little brick house up, and then scrape out the fire, and it's the residual heat from the oven that actually does the baking, right? But you can't just, once it's hot, it's hot. And the temperature over time will slowly decline, and a good baker would be able to kind of feel the heat from the oven and gauge how hot the oven is, but you can't modify that temperature short of putting more fire in it. You can't turn it down, though. You just have to wait. So ovens were generally mostly used for bread. They were occasionally used for pies. There are bakers who actually baked pies, but a lot of pie recipes don't count on having an oven because most households didn't have ovens. And they didn't have ovens in the kitchen. The oven was a separate building, usually in a courtyard. If a castle or a palace or a mansion or a villa had an oven, it was not part of the kitchen. So for the kitchen cooks, they basically Dutch ovened it, right? For those of you who've cooked with a Dutch oven, that's a medieval concept. And so basically, this clay pot, which has a lid, this is a Dutch oven, right? I can actually cook this on the stovetop and it will act like a Dutch oven. And if I actually had coals, hot coals, the coals could go right here on this lid, this part of the lid. And so you'll have heat from below the moderate fire of your hearth, and then you'll have heat from above. right? So that is why this recipe talks about cooking it over a moderate fire, because they expect you're cooking this on a hearth, not in an oven. Okay, so back to our pastry dough then. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually add a little bit of water to this and melt this over. And I'm going to be working on my stove. I do not have, unfortunately, I do not currently have access to a proper medieval hearth or a hearth in a medieval style. I've been pondering ways I could set one up on the rooftop of our little vacation apartment building. So we'll see what clever things. I'm getting a hell no, but you know, I don't take no usually as an answer. Okay, let me just pop over here and get some water. And because dough can be tricky, pastry dough can be tricky, I'm just putting just a little bit of water in here with the butter. We're going to melt that, and then I like to reserve the water for a little bit of extra water for later after we mix it all together with the flour, so that if there more hydration is needed, I can add a little more water rather than having to add more flour to counter overhydration. Nancy, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Yeah. And Owl TF Studio. Oh, that was okay. Okay. Right. So while our butter
just showed up on mine.
Oh, okay. If you're enjoying this, please like and subscribe. Double tap the screen to like if you're on a mobile device. Right, so while our butter water mixture is heating up on our very modern stove, let's go ahead and get to the business of the rest of the recipe. Unfortunately, because we're in a vacation home, I don't really have all of my usual equipment here, so I don't have much of my medieval replica items, and I am sorry for that. So we will be working with a metal mixing bowl. Medieval mixing bowls were made of pottery, basically.
El Metropolis says, I support your roof fire adventures.
Thank you, El Metropolis, Elf Metropolis, handsome. Hell Metropolis, yeah. Hell Metropolis, I appreciate your support. Thank you. I need to convince someone here that we should do this.
Behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes, literally. Okay. So for those who aren't familiar with working with eggs, a lot of, especially Americans, we've been trained that everything has to be refrigerated or we're going to die of food poisoning. And that's just not true. Eggs especially are shelf stable if they are not scrubbed of their protective coating like they are in America when they're processed, right? So depending on the country you're in, your eggs don't need to be refrigerated. For those of you who've gone shopping in other countries and were unable to find the eggs because they're not in the refrigerator case, it's because they don't need to be. But also when you're baking or cooking with eggs, you really want them to be at room temperature. It impacts how they mix. It impacts how they incorporate into your dish. So if you are actually plan your dishes and you don't just decide at a spur of the moment that you're going to make something, take your eggs out and let them come to room temperature. You're not going to die, I promise.
If you support the rooftop fire adventures, give a thumbs up.
Yeah. If you support, it's a little bit of an interruption from the eggs, but if you support rooftop fire cooking adventures, then go ahead and give us a heart or a thumbs up there. Okay, so these eggs have been sitting out, so they are room temperature. And so our recipe says get 10 or 12 eggs. We've scaled it down, so we've got 2 eggs, and beat them thoroughly. Right, so here's the thing about beating things in a medieval kitchen. I have no evidence. I found not any evidence, visual, documentary, or otherwise, of a whisk in the medieval period. So basically, the implement of choice is a wooden spoon, right, or a wooden spatula. So, and I have found that it is entirely possible, although much more annoying, to mix eggs up very well with a wooden spoon. You can do it. It takes longer than with a whisk, right? And the earliest form of a whisk, as far as I can tell, is actually used to turn egg whites into glaire, and that's used in art. And basically, you take a branch a good clean branch, and you splinter the ends so that you end up with a branch with a splintered end, right? You just cause the ends of the branch to fray, basically. And that was used to actually turn egg whites into glaire. Glaire is basically, it's fermented egg whites, so you let the egg whites actually go stale, in quotes, and then that is used in art to help fix the pigments in paints in the Middle Ages. So yeah, but I've not seen any evidence of that necessarily being used in a kitchen environment. Although I could make that concession. Say, well, I found out that they used this proto whisk in mixing glaire, so why can't I use this proto whisk in the kitchen as well? It's possible. I just haven't seen evidence of it. Oh dear, we're about to lose this. About to lose my pendant. Okay. So if you have never worked with a clay pot before, one of the good things to understand is that you don't have to keep the fire on the whole time you are cooking on it. And I'll just show you what I mean here. Because once the clay pot is warm, it stays warm for a long time. So it's warm. I'm just going to let this, kind of the butter continue melting on its own. And I should have been paying closer attention because it definitely didn't need to get this warm. I'm just going to let that cool down here on the side.
Tanya says hi.
Tanya, welcome. Thank you. She's one of our channel members, so she gets an extra say in whether we go try to set the roof on fire.
Allie says I'm learning lots of stuff about food storage. Nancy gave you a heart. Susan asked, does a rooftop have a water source and picnic area? Actually, it does have a water source.
It does have a water source. Yeah, rooftop does have a water source, and it's a picnic area is a strong statement, but there's some planters off to one side that have not been tended in any way.
Me says lovely dress.
Thank you for that compliment on the dress. This is a 1480s style Florentine gown called a cotta.
And also says what type of witchery is that cooking contraption? And LPK asks, is that because of the cost of pigments?
The glare. So was glare used because of the cost of the pigments? No, it's part of the binding process. Glare, the fermentation of the egg whites breaks down the egg whites and allows it to be more efficient in the creation of paints and for medieval. But I think the glare was actually used to help set the paint. It's been a while since I've looked into the use of glare, but it is something you need if you want to do medieval illumination. But yes, medieval pigments were crazy expensive. And depending on the pigment, well, some of them were. Some of them were locally available and cheap. Aquamarine, though, was crazy expensive because that was made from lapis lazuli, but it isn't just ground up lapis lazuli. There's a much more involved process in turning ground up lapis lazuli into aquamarine. So it was crazy expensive. Here we go. See, it actually, even with just a wooden spoon, it actually doesn't do a very bad job. I'm going to tilt this down a little more. So
Amiga que está preparando.
Hola Jorge, ¿qué tal? Estamos preparando una torta de queso del siglo XV. Yeah. Italiano. Una torta italiana. So this is an Italian. So for those who are just tuning in, we are making a 15th century Italian cheesecake, a Neapolitan cheesecake, actually from Naples. And this is a recipe that was also used as a base for a variety of other cheesecakes with other additives like elder blossoms when it was elder blossom season. For those of you who are from Germany, you can particularly appreciate that because when the elder berries come, or when the elder blossoms come, a lot of Germans actually go out and pick them, and especially the berries as well. Yeah. So I think that's looking pretty thoroughly mixed. Yeah. Lovely. Okay, I'm just going to go over here and check on our, now overheated, I got talking, damn it. I got talking, and so our pot got a little hotter, much hotter than I wanted it. So I'm going to decant our hot mixture into another bowl so that it will hopefully cool down, because we don't want the butter water mixture for our pastry to be too hot. We just want it to be melted. But I don't want it so hot that it cooks the egg when I add the egg to it, right? That's not what we want to have happen. Now, I know you all have heard me say this before. They didn't have rubber scrapers in the Middle Ages. They didn't have, as far as I can tell, any kind of scraper in the Middle Ages, but I'm a rubber scraper addict and I can't tolerate anything going to waste. So we're just going to go ahead and scrape our pan out to get the rest of that butter and water
Herb Queen.
into it.
Herb Queen.
Herb Queen, welcome.
Nice.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us again. Lovely to see you again.
Samuel C. says, I'm so happy I can view the old ways through a phone. If only I had a time machine.
Yeah, so some of you have asked me where I might like to go in the past, when and where I might like to go if I could time travel to the past. And the answer is nowhere. What I want is a time window so I can look into any moment in the past and observe. Maybe one that also allows me to smell things and somehow magically taste things. But honestly, traveling back to the past is just too dangerous. It really is. It's just too dangerous. Okay, so I mentioned that we should pre-mix everything as much as possible before adding. And so I'm going to go ahead and mix the egg that is going to be part of our pastry in a separate bowl so that it doesn't get mixed up with my torta eggs. This is my pastry egg that I'm now mixing.
Jorge said, delicioso. Acá en Ecuador consumo muchos postres.
Yeah.
Team dulces.
Yeah, see, Jorge, lo sé. Jorge basically said in Ecuador they eat a lot of desserts and sweet things. Sí, lo sé. Today's cheesecake is going to be a little sweet. I don't think it's going to be terribly sweet, but it will be, by medieval standards, it definitely would have been considered sweet, 100%. Now, they didn't have the same concept of dessert necessarily that we do. They had a concept of sweet treats, but dessert as a separate course, not so much. Not in the 15th century. Now, by the 16th century, they developed the sugar course, what I call the sugar course, in very upper class households, where the wealthy members of the household and their wealthy guests would actually retreat to a separate room and literally eat sugar sculptures, like sugar that had been molded into complex sculptures, and then they would just eat that, just sugar, not anything else, just sugar. That's why their teeth started rotting.
Great Aunt Elizabeth says fingers make good soft scrapers.
Yes, Great Aunt Elizabeth, you're 100% correct, except that pan, yes. So Great Aunt Elizabeth's comment is fingers make great soft scrapers. Yes, but that pan was way too hot to use my finger as a soft scraper.
Samuel C. said, in reference to your time machine answer, that would be cool, and you're probably right.
Yeah. Now, if I could time travel safely, like there was some enchantment that would make me impermeable and infallible and unimputable and all those things, that would somehow grant me perfect safety, i.e. no diseases, no violence, and all of that. Gosh, there are so many places I would love to go. But if I were actually exposed to all of the dangers of any of those given eras, I don't want to go anywhere without antibiotics. For instance. Yeah. Por cierto. Yeah, for certain.
Feliz San Valentin.
Oh, thank you, Jorge. Feliz San Valentin a ti. Oh. Yeah, so we're doing one of my favorite things together, cooking. So thank you for joining me on this Valentine's Day for my cooking party. As I was saying at the beginning, I haven't really found any particular connection with the medieval celebration of St. Valentine's Day and food. There's lots of objects that you can wear that are associated with St. Valentine or with romantic gifts, with love tokens in the Middle Ages, but nothing that's associated with food that I could tell. Now, I could see that a lover wanting to impress a potential lover, especially wanting to impress a lady, for instance, a knight trying to impress a lady might give her a gift of fresh fruit, fresh exotic fruit, because fresh fruit, especially of an exotic type, would have been a very expensive, an expensive item. So I could see that happening. I just don't have any evidence of it. Whereas I have lots of evidence of all kinds of other love tokens: rings, belts, shoes, stockings, pouches, purses, brooches, all sorts of things that you can wear on your person, which are also permanent and aren't going to be eaten and disappear eventually into a middens, basically. So yeah, it seems that love tokens in the Middle Ages were more permanent in nature. We're more enduring. And we're something also that you would wear on your person against your skin, right? So that's a big deal, is that it's like it's coming in contact with your skin. Stockings are very intimate. Garters would be worn around your knee, pressed against your flesh, right? Rings against the skin of your hands. So, you know, shoes, something that would be secret and mostly, especially as a lady, mostly not seen by other people. Okay, so there are our eggs. There are eggs, our singular egg for our pastry dough. I'm just going to check on the temperature of the water and butter that we have melted to turn into our pastry dough. And it is... I think it's cool enough that we can go ahead and... I love Kerrygold butter so much. Kerrygold butter, grass-fed butter, 100% grass-fed butter is amazing. It is the most delicious thing ever. I can eat this. I call this spoonable butter because I can just stick a spoon in it, take a scoop out and stick the spoon in my mouth, and that's good enough. I don't need anything else with this butter. Why dilute such a beautiful butter with something like bread when you can just eat the butter?
Now Jorge's just being mean. I can't. Cuando tenía enamorado.
Oh, so interestingly, the live stream chat on my end automatically translates it, which is strange.
Really?
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
En estas fechas la cochinaba ahora mi
Food never fails. Jorge, tienes razón. Tienes razón. La comida nunca falle. Fallece. So I'm just now mixing our butter and water and egg together so that they will become one mixture. And then we're going to add that to our flour.
Metropolis asked about your necklace. Is it a reproduction of any specific one?
Yes. So this gem, there we go, you can see it better. That is a replica of a gem that belonged to Beatrice d'Este. So it is a little bit appropriate because her mother was Neapolitan. Her mother was from the royal family of Naples. And she and her sister dressed in very Spanish fashions and spread Spanish fashions basically all throughout northern Italy. So this is a replica of one that she owned, and it's depicted on her in at least one portrait, but I kind of think several portraits. So yeah, this is a replica. It is by Armor and Castings. You can see just the beautiful eye for detail. It is not expensive. I think it's $50. And if you would like to buy anything from them, check out armorandcastings.com, armor with a U. One word, Armor and Castings. And Contessa 10 will get you an extra 10% off any purchase from them. They have amazing jewelry. I have a lot of their jewelry. And the wide Burgundian belt that some of you have seen on me in various videos, that's the belt setting is from them. I'm about to get another belt setting from them that will be turning into a sexy demescent hip belt. So yeah, we love their products so much. So here is our water and butter and egg mixture. And I'm now going to go ahead and the recipes don't generally call for salt in these pie crusts, but I'm a salt person, so I'm going to just add some salt to this. And that could honestly be because, to be honest, I'm going to bet that medieval butter was always salted. Why would medieval butter always been salted? For shelf stability, right? Salt will allow butter, and the more salt you add, the more this is true. Salt will allow your butter to stay stable. It will prevent it from going rancid, and it will prevent any kind of undesirable microbial colonization for a long time. But if you don't salt your butter, you're going to be sad. So I'm pretty certain that medieval butter was probably usually salted. But I would like to find out from that 15th century manual on cheese and butter that I've discovered, because there's actually a whole chapter that's entitled How to Make Butter. So I'm hoping it actually says something about the salting of the butter. Okay. Right. So I'm now just going to go ahead and mix this in. And this is definitely going to create a chewier crust than you would normally find in a modern American pie, for instance. So just, be prepared for that. It's not it's good. It's just not flaky and light like you might expect.
Herb Queen says, "Oh my God, it's so hard what you're doing. It's like referring to history of cooking. I'd have burned everything already. You're doing a great job."
Oh, thank you, Herb Queen. Appreciate that. Okay, so remember I said that I intentionally didn't put the full amount of water that I thought I was going to need in the slurry that we made in the pot. Because now that I've seen just, how much hydration this flour is actually taking, I can adjust by adding a little more water until it comes together. Right. And that's because, remember, any kind of pie dough you're making, the humidity and the barometric pressure are going to impact how much water you actually need. Also, your elevation is going to impact how much water you actually need to add. So it's actually better to err on the side of caution and initially add less water. And then you can just add in little drips and drops until you achieve the right texture. And the right texture is Play-Doh. That is the right texture for pie dough. You want Play-Doh, basically. So, for example, I can pick this up and give it the squeeze test, right? And the squeeze test tells me whether it's going to adhere to each other, whether it's crumbly, right? So we want it, so it's actually a little bit crumbly, right? You can see that. And it's going to get more crumbly because as it sits, because it's going to, right now, a lot of the moisture is on the outside of the flour. It hasn't been absorbed into the flour particles. So we need to add a little bit more initially, and then it will absorb into it and redistribute. And that's one of the reasons that I really like to make the pie dough first, so that it has time to sit and hydrate. And that's why a lot of you, for those of you who have made pie dough recipes, and you might have wondered, why is it that it wants me to let it sit for half an hour? So that it can fully hydrate, so that all of the ingredients, the fat and the water, can all be fully absorbed. Fat and water, yes, can be, specifically the water can be absorbed into the flour before you actually bake it for maximum goodness. Right? And the same thing here. It's one of the reasons we're basically starting with our pie dough, and then we'll move on to the filling. And this recipe is happily not a complicated one. There are some torta recipes that they're real complicated. This is not one of them, though. At least not by my standards. And for those who are working with wheat flour, and I'm technically not, but it looks like wheat flour. Wheat flour has gluten. Gluten is a protein that basically gets stronger. The gluten basically forms a network, a lattice. And the more you work the flour, the tighter the lattice gets. So when you are working with wheat flour, you really want to minimally mix your flour, mix things. You want to minimally process it. The more you mix it, the tougher your crust is going to get. Now, if you want a tough crust, keep mixing. But that's why it's best to kind of add the water a little bit at a time. Actually, now that I've added, let's go ahead and give it a squeeze test. That's actually feeling good, but I can also tell that the edges are a little dry. So I'm going to add just a little bit more water, and then we're going to put that all together into a ball and let it hydrate. So just remember, if you're working with wheat flour, you really do want to make certain that you minimally mix it, especially after you've added the water. Now, one of the tricks in modern pastry dough is to not add water at all, but instead to add a mixture of water and vodka, because vodka has really high percentage of alcohol. Alcohol does not trigger gluten formation. It does not cause the gluten to create that lattice work, and it evaporates under heat. So it evaporates and it leaves all these little flaky layers. But that's definitely a modern trick. I've never seen, for one, they didn't have spirits like that in the 15th century, for regular consumption. Wine would definitely not have the same effect. So this is definitely a modern trick, but if you're making a modern pastry, modern pie dough, and you want it to be extra flaky, then have a 50-50 mixture of water and vodka, and you'll end up with super flake. Okay, so now this is looking good. So I'm just going to work this into a ball. And yes, normally I should probably be using my hands for this, but I'd like to minimize the amount I have to go and wash my hands behind the tapestry behind me. So yeah.
I've hidden the sink.
The sink is hidden. But there we go. Right. And so now I'm just going to set this off to the side and let it hydrate. Now, often recipes will say cover it with plastic and put it in the fridge. Okay, you can put it in the fridge. Why cover it with plastic? Don't you have small plates? I have really lovely small plates somewhere here, right? That are, oh, handsome. You need to fix it. I have lovely small plates that are just the right size to cover my bowl, and then I can put it in the fridge. No need to use plastic wrap. I don't understand this obsession with using plastic wrap single-use items when we don't bloody well need them. There's a perfectly good option to cover your pastry dough that way without creating more plastic waste. Okay, so our pastry dough is now going to hydrate while we finish our mixture. So to bring us up to speed on the filling for our cheese torta. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and light the fire in my hearth, i.e. the oven. So we will be using an oven, but that's because I don't have any way of really creating the kind of distant, no, I could probably rig something up, but not today. I don't have any way of really recreating on my stovetop a medieval hearth. The oven will actually be a more accurate replica of a medieval hearth for our purposes than my stovetop will. Because my stovetop, the way the flames work here, it'll just burn them, right? Because it says the instructions say to bake this over a moderate fire, but they really don't necessarily mean flames, they mean coals, right? And coals have an evenly distributed radiant heat, whereas flames really focus heat in very specific parts, and so you end up burning the thing. You'll end up just burning your pie, right? So I don't have a way to replicate coals. The oven is actually the best way to replicate coals. Okay, so we have our eggs all beaten and mixed up. Next, we're going to go to the pounding of the ginger, as I mentioned, that you always want to, but before that, we're gonna have to peel it. I'm gonna show you a trick for peeling ginger. Any ingredients that you want to add to a mortar and pestle, you want to cut them first, but in this case, we have to peel the ginger first. It actually says to peel the ginger. A trick for peeling ginger is a spoon. You can actually use the spoon edge. It works really well. Go ahead and show you the technique. Right, see how easily that comes off, and you lose minimum amounts of the ginger that way. If you use a peeler, like a vegetable peeler on ginger, you're probably going to lose half of your ginger to the peeling process. Whereas the spoon just scrapes off just the outer layer, basically. You lose almost no actual ginger to this process. And it's also very interesting that it actually specifies peeled ginger. I've seen that in almost no other recipes. So that's a very interesting detail that the cook bothered to indicate here. And obviously this is much easier if you have a bigger piece, but we were working with not very much ginger. It's basically in our quartered recipe, it ends up being only about 4 grams of peeled ginger, not very much. Okay, so there is our peeled ginger. I have to remember to hum 15th century tunes when I'm doing random humming. Okay, now the other thing I said is that to make it easier to pound things in a mortar, then you just slice it. Basically, the finer you can get it with your knife to start with, the easier it'll be to process it in the pounder later on. So this is really a symbiotic relationship between the knife and the mortar and pestle. And if you're occupying an apartment, as I am, you want to be nice to your neighbors. Make sure to put padding underneath of your mortar to minimize the amount of pounding that they will therefore have to experience. There we go. Okay. So you can see what's happening. Fresh ginger pounds up really easily. It doesn't take much effort. And I'm trying to be a little more delicate with it because, you can hear me pounding, the pounding noise, and also neighbors. But if I didn't have neighbors, I would be applying a bunch more force to this.
Where did they get ginger from?
Ginger comes from Southeast Asia. It is imported. It is a tropical marsh plant, basically. So it was, it came in two different kinds. It came as basic kinds, came dried and it came fresh. And we actually know that in 15th century England, gosh, how much was it? It was, trying to remember the quantity. I think I don't remember the quantity, but not very much fresh ginger cost the same as a sheep in 14th century England. I think it was a pound of ginger. It cost the same as one sheep. So it was pretty valuable. But it was imported. It was imported from Asia, basically. It was one of those, just like pretty much most of the spices that were used in these medieval European recipes came from Asia, South Asia, or Southeast Asia, but from Asia.
Wow, very expensive.
Yeah, yeah.
Whole sheep?
Yeah. Just 1 pound of ginger for a whole sheep. Yeah, so that also tells you kind of the luxury level of this dish. Now, granted, England is much further on the trade routes than Italy is, so it was probably slightly less expensive in Italy, having much more direct access and having to account for less rot and less loss in goods. So yeah, so there is our pounded ginger. I'm just going to, for now, put that off to the side. Little ingredient bush, Jesus. Don't know where that word came from. Ingredient dish. Okay, so now we're supposed to, now I'm just going to double check and make sure there's nothing else that needs processing before we add it to our mortar, and no, nothing else. Okay, so it says cut up a small 1.5 pounds of new cheese. In our quarter recipe, that is 115 grams. And we're using fresh cheese. So in this, it's basically more or less like cream cheese, so it doesn't really need cutting up. As I said earlier, I suspect this is probably supposed to be farmer's cheese, based on the idea that it needs to be cut up small before being added into the mortar and pestle. But I don't have farmer's cheese. I've got cream cheese that I make myself. I'm hoping, however, as I said earlier, to actually get into making my own farmer's cheese. To therefore have it for these recipes, have a new cheese that is mild and relatively creamy and relatively moist. Because that's, as I said earlier, and I'll repeat for those just joining, welcome if you're just joining to my Valentine's Day medieval cooking party. The key characteristics of a fresh cheese, of a new cheese, will be that it's mild in flavor, that it's not very salty or salty at all, and that it's moist, that it has moisture. Because aged cheeses are much stronger in flavor, they get salty over time, and they, not necessarily that there's more salt in them, but they develop a salty taste. And they, of course, get hard, right, and dry, because moisture actually evaporates over time. So that is, when you're recreating these recipes, those are key characteristics that one should keep in mind, because that will affect the flavor and the texture. Okay, as we see, it doesn't take long to turn cream cheese into cream cheese, apparently, creamed cheese, right? It would take longer and it would be slightly more involved if this were actually a new cheese, like a farmer's cheese, because that will be a little drier, it will be more crumbly, a little more resistant to this particular process. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, I am working with a much smaller mortar than a medieval kitchen would have had. It is what it is. We will struggle forth, though, in the pursuit of historical recreation. Okay.
Maybe writing to peel the ginger was the author wanting to say, prepare it properly, dummy, because it was so expensive.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe the author saying peel the ginger was an indication that you needed to prepare it properly because of its expense. Yeah, that is indeed a good possibility. Okay.
Maybe because it was so exotic, they didn't know how to prepare it. Like, you don't normally peel a beet, I guess.
You definitely peeled vegetables in the Middle Ages.
A beet?
Yeah.
You peel a beet?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, they just eat the beet. A beet, the little red things. Radish. I'm thinking of radish.
You're thinking of radish. Okay, now it says to pound the cheese with the sugar. So I've just added our sugar. And again, that is white granulated sugar, very refined, would have been the sugar of choice in the Middle Ages, and would have been, again, an extreme luxury item. Very, very luxury item. Sugar is not something that was readily available on mainland Europe, and it wasn't being produced in sort of industrial quantities in any case. So very expensive luxury item. This whole tort, much of this tort speaks to luxury. The conspicuous consumption, literal consumption of the 15th century. Okay. Sugar has been ground in. Again, if this were a slightly more aged new cheese, this would be be a more involved process. Okay. Next, we add our peeled and pounded ginger. In it goes. I'm going to go ahead and mix that in. And even though the recipe doesn't clearly state that it should be added one at a time and then mixed, the implication of the grammatical structure is such. So that's why we're adding one of the ingredient as it's listed at a time. And that's just going to get you the best mixture anyway, because if you put too much in a bowl, this is any era of cooking, if you put too many ingredients in a bowl at once, especially when you're mixing by hand and then you mix, you might end up with spots that just don't actually have all the ingredients, and then you end up with an inconsistent texture, right? Okay, let's see. Next, half a pound of lard or butter. In our recipe scaled down, that equals about 40 grams. Again, butter does not need to be kept refrigerated, everyone, especially if your butter is salted. My butter is. So the other thing, medieval butter would not have been cold. It would not have been hard, which means that it's very easy to just add this butter because it's already soft into our mortar and pestle, and it just mixes right in, right? Like so. Okay. And this is different. So this is definitely very different from a modern cheesecake, right? Modern cheesecake, at least the various versions of cheesecake across Europe that I've made, none of them had butter or lard in the actual mixture itself. So this is going to be different. This will definitely give it a different flavor and a different texture, but that's why it's important that you use butter that tastes delicious on its own, like grass-fed butter. Irish butter is the best. I've never tasted a butter that was more delicious than Irish butter, because in Ireland it is illegal to feed your cows grain. So they are only fodder-fed and grass-fed, and fodder is like branches and leaves and whatnot. And so their milk is therefore very rich in vitamins A and K. It actually tastes like something. It's full of healthy fatty acids that are actually good for you. So the saturated fat from grass-fed butter is not the same as saturated fat from industrially raised cows. It's a different fatty acid. It impacts your body and your health in a whole different way. It's one of the reasons that people in the Middle Ages, even though they were eating a really high-fat diet, weren't stroking out and dying of cardiovascular disease all the time, because their fats were healthy fats that came from healthy animals that had the right fatty acid profile, whereas we in the modern world, we have all these very unhealthy fats from unhealthy animals. So the whole grass-fed thing, it's not just a craze, and it's not fake. It's not a hoax. Take my word for that. But also, grass-fed butter just tastes like actual butter. I used to think I hated butter. Some of you heard this before. I'll say it again. I grew up thinking I didn't like butter because all we had was the industrially raised butter from cows that had very unhappy lives. And then I immigrated to Germany, and then I got European butter, and those cows are happier. And it was okay. It wasn't gross. It just was okay. But then I tried Kerrygold somewhere in my late 20s, and it felt as though the sun had finally come out, the rainbow spread across the sky, and suddenly I understood how glorious butter could be. Right? And so since then, it's been grass-fed butter for me only. Ideally, Kerrygold or Irish butter of some kind. So what we're getting here is One of the issues I have is that, of course, my mortar is tiny, so I can't necessarily mix with the vigor that I would like to. But actually adding the butter into this, it is grinding up, a little bit, little by little. But it's a little bit challenging to actually get the butter to really become one with this mixture, to become homogeneous. That's the word I was seeking, because I can't really get as crazy with it as I would if it were a full medieval size mortar. Another reason that we had to scale down the recipe is the reality of physics set in. So let's see. I'm going to go from mixing to actually grinding, to actually, basically using friction to try to break the little globs of butter down so that it becomes much more homogeneous. Because what we don't want to have happen, we really want the butter as distributed as possible, because if there's big chunks of butter in the oven, it's just going to kind of melt into these pockets of butter oil, basically. And then, when it comes out of the oven and it cools, they'll cool back into little pieces of butter, but they'll be different because of the heat. The proteins will have separated out from the milk in the butter, and so we'll end up with, actually, it'll be kind of greasy. So we don't want that. We want it to be as well mixed in as possible. At least that's what I think would happen. I've actually never made this recipe before, so we are actually experimenting with this together. If you're enjoying, don't forget to like and subscribe. And I would like to thank all of you who have left super chats today. Really appreciate that. And all of my channel members and patrons, I really appreciate your support as well. I shared a couple of things this morning with my patrons and my channel members in my Creative Contessa Discord, some resources relating to cooking, medieval cooking specifically. Some of them may be more helpful than others. And if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat, the live chat, and we will address them. So today is, for many of you, Valentine's Day. And, the modern celebration involves cards and chocolate and strawberries. Strawberries in the medieval world, food-related stuff, were not necessarily associated with Valentine's Day. They were considered an aphrodisiac in certain sources, though. But medieval strawberries were much smaller than modern strawberries. They were more like wild strawberries. Much smaller, denser, more flavorful, less watery, right? Probably more nutrient dense as well. And they actually, therefore, had a longer shelf life because they just weren't as delicate, because they were smaller and more compact. And that's true of a lot of medieval foodstuffs. They are, what we have now are Frankenstein's monsters versions of fruits and vegetables for the most part, because they've been selectively bred to be bigger and bigger and bigger so that, they can kind of maximize profits from crops. Unfortunately, that means that they're usually less nutrient dense. They just have more water. It also means that they are more subject generally to rot, ironically. So the flavors and the textures of the medieval cultivars of these fruits and vegetables would have been different. Would have probably been more intense. They would have been less watery. In some cases, more bitter. Oranges are a great example of that. Oranges and lemons are often interchangeable in medieval recipes because the oranges were usually not very sweet or sweet at all. Okay, well, this has made a fluffy mixture, and I think that might be basically as finely mixed down as I'm going to get this butter with the small mortar that I have. I've got some really stubborn pieces of butter that just don't want to give up. It's okay. Probably thinking about this, if I had creamed the butter first, again, okay, something I'll do next time. Next time, in the mortar, I will cream the butter separately. In the mortar, I'll mix the butter up and, get it all creamy and fluffed up, and then it will hopefully blend a little more evenly into this mixture.
Plug time.
For which thing?
You.
Oh.
If you like.
Oh, you didn't hear me say that already?
Oh, did it?
Yeah, I just recently said, if you're enjoying, please like and subscribe. I think I said that recently.
I may have been crushing Haas and Chess.
Oh,
You hear
okay.
that, Haas? I'm just kidding.
Just kidding. Sure you are. Okay, let me just have a little drink of tea. I'm today, for those of you who know, I'm a tea junkie. Tea was not available in medieval Europe. It doesn't even come to Europe until the 17th century. Obviously, in Asia, they've had tea for thousands of years, and it started being drunk about 2,000 years ago, as far as we can tell, basically with the rise of Buddhism. But I love tea. And so we're actually drinking a tea that I brought back from Thailand. So this is an oolong tea from a Thai tea plantation. Very yummy.
Sabrina says, I'm always so sad to see how fast my strawberries rot after I buy some from the market.
Yeah, Sabrina, so true. Sabrina comments how quickly the strawberries rot when she buys them from the market. Yeah, 100%, right? And that is in part, they've been selectively bred for certain characteristics over other characteristics. So, okay. Yeah. Okay, so here we go. This is our mixture thus far. This is our ginger, our eggs, our ginger, our cheese, and our butter, basically. And I can tell you that there is definitely, there's a nice tang of ginger in there, but it's not overwhelming at all. There's obviously the tang from the cream cheese itself, and it is sweet, but it is absolutely not overwhelmingly sweet. So I think this is going to come out to be not terribly sweet by modern standards, which is fine with me. Okay, so then it says to add in a folietta of milk. Oh boy. Okay, so okay, so now we have to add in, this is our quarter of a folietta of milk. So a folietta of milk I calculated to be 500 milliliters. And so we're quartering this recipe. So that means that this is 125 milliliters of whole milk. Remember, milk in the Middle Ages is always going to be whole milk. It will never be skim. It will never be 2%. It will always be whole milk. So if you're doing a medieval recipe, please use whole milk, or you will really regret your life choices, or at least that life choice. So I am, what the hell? I'm just gonna. Okay, yeah, it'll be challenging, but we can do it. Okay, in we go. We're going to gently mix.
I've seen the white insides of American frankenstein strawberries. Horrors beyond my European understanding.
Yeah, well, so we are currently staying in Korea. We're vacationing in Korea, kind of touring in Korea at the moment, and it's hear this out. It's strawberry season. It's February and it's cold outside, and somehow it's strawberry season. So the Koreans have trained their strawberries to basically, they force them to ripen in January and February, and they're not ripe. They are giant, watery, tasteless nastiness. I do not like Korean strawberries at all. They're huge. They're just, the cells are so bloated with water that you can like taste each cell in the strawberry. You can feel it in your mouth. The texture is terrible. The taste is terrible. And I'm pretty certain they are forced to ripen by just being gassed. So yeah, disgusting. What, handsome?
So I said, lol, trained strawberries.
Yeah, right. Trained strawberries. Exactly. They've like good Koreans. They follow orders. Okay.
Says tea is soothing and yummies. Sabrina said, would they drink plant infusion since they did not have tea or other warm drinks? When did coffee come in again? That was fairly late.
17th century.
17th century.
That's when it gets to Europe. Yeah. So
they got all the hot drinks at the same time.
Yeah, they got all the hot drinks. No, there are hot drinks. There are herbal tisanes from this era. The Ménagier de Paris. So the question is, what did people drink? What kind of hot beverages did they drink? If they could not drink, trying to get the angle right. If they could not drink, or they didn't have tea or coffee, right? So there's a book from 1391 called the Ménagier de Paris, the Good Men of Paris. It's a manual it's a manual on household management for an upper middle class family. So not a noble house, but a merchant's house. And it's a step-by-step guide in how to properly conduct all the affairs that you would need to run a very large household, right, in a rich family. And one of the sets, there's recipes in there, and there's a couple of recipes for beverages that involve herbs, steeped herbs, They're basically infusions, infused water. It's infused water where you infuse the water with basil and sage and some other different herbs that most people would consider to be weeds now. And the menagier actually advises his young 15-year-old bride, for whom he's composed this guide to how to be the best wife ever. He advises her to keep a couple of different pitchers of this infused water to serve to guests. So we know that they had infused water that was infused with the herbs that would have been locally available. He also mentions that it's good for health. Small beer and small ale was a very common beverage across most of, especially the lower classes. And small beer and small ale, this would be the second brewing, right? So it has like 1% alcohol or 2% alcohol at most. It's very low alcohol content. It's more like kombucha without the kombucha flavors. Wine was, of course, consumed, always diluted. No one drank undiluted wine in the Middle Ages, and certain rulers were known for being particularly temperate by diluting their wine 3-to-1. Philip the Good of Burgundy was one such ruler, for instance. And if you've ever actually had chilled diluted wine on a summer day, it's so refreshing. It's so nice. It's so pleasant. And I know there are probably people in France and Germany who are rolling over, having a conniption fit. But that is the reality of medieval beverages. There was, depending on where you were in northern France, you know, they had cider. Right, but the same thing applied. Like there was the second brewing of the cider that would have had way less alcohol than the initial one. Distilled beverages are not a thing yet. Distillation is something that is performed by alchemists and who are seeking the elixir of life and how to, you know, turn lead into gold. It's not yet become a beverage. Distilled beverages aren't a thing yet, but that's about to happen. Like at the end of the 15th century, that kind of starts changing. It's still not a common thing. That's gin. Gin is one of these things that like wrecks Europe, right? Because so many people get hooked on gin, but that's not a medieval thing. That's like an 18th century problem. So yeah, those are the kind of beverages they had. Good question. Thank you for asking. Yeah, water. Water is also sometimes, you know, if not everywhere in Europe had poison, you had water that was filled with pathogens, right? So there were places in Europe that had clean water and then they would drink it. Especially rainwater was clean because it was collected in a cistern and it had been filtered basically by evaporative action and the clouds. Okay, so we are now at the stage where we are going to combine our milk custard, or our cheese mixture, our milk and cheese and butter mixture with our egg mixture. So here we go. Again, this would all have been so much easier if I had a large mortar and pestle, but I don't. Nope. Well, I've got a slightly larger one, but it's not even large enough, honestly. Oh, for God's sake. No, you're not going to go out and buy a larger mortar and pestle. First off, I don't think I've seen any here. We're not looking hard enough. Okay. The great thing about a granite mortar is that it's like a workout while you're cooking. Okay, so now I'm going to take my wooden spoon and we're going to mix these thoroughly together as it suggests. Yummy. Tasty mixture. Okay, so note to make it whiter. We decided we didn't care about white. I'd rather have this enriching lecithin from the yolks than have a white tart. Yeah, mix it together thoroughly. Okay. Henson, could you get me the sugar out, please? So we can see there's some of these little chunks are actually like little tiny bits of ginger, because wet ginger, I'm just gonna add a little more because I remember this sugar is less sweet than regular sugar, right? So there's little chunks here, and some of those are like the little tiny bits of ginger because ginger is fibrous. But a lot of that is the the little pieces of butter that I couldn't quite convince to completely break down. Again, next time I would cream that first in the mortar and pestle, or even just, maybe not even with the mortar and pestle, I would cream it first with a spoon, right? That's a lesson learned for next time. I thought about preparing the other things, but I didn't think about the butter. That's on me. And I should know better because I've been baking for over 30 years. Oh no, I've been baking for, how old am I? I've been baking for almost 40 years. I should know better. Okay, it's looking good. So Valentine's Day, while we mix, let's chat about Valentine's Day a little bit. Valentine's Day as a ritualized practice of love is really first attested at the end of the 14th century, and it's by Geoffrey Chaucer in his work, A Parliament of Fowls, where he talks about February being the season when every bird finds its mate. And it's this whole allegorical poem that talks about, all these birds basically pairing up. So it seems that the concept of Valentine's Day being a time for romantic interaction, and specifically in the season of February, is a Northern European thing, because that was a belief that was kind of prevalent all across Northern Europe in the Middle Ages, that February was the time when the birds paired up, right, when they found their mates. And so that is hence the association with an otherwise not very pleasant time of year, February, with romantic entanglement. And then the earliest Valentine's letter that we have, and I did say this yesterday in the sewing party, but I'll say it again. The earliest Valentine's Day or Valentine's letter that we have that has survived in Europe anyway, dates to 1415, and it's from Charles the Duke of Orleans to his wife back in France. And Charles the Duke of Orleans was a hostage of Henry IV of London. By the way, life in the Tower of London in the 15th century was just fine. He was very well kept. He was treated like an honored guest. He just wasn't allowed to go back to France. So he missed his wife, his lady wife, his duchess, so much that he writes her this beautiful letter in which he says, I am sick with missing you. I long for you intensely. And I actually did bring my book of notes this day, and I did write down the original French. Because the French was just so beautiful. I thought I wrote down the original French. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Je suis déjà d'amour tanné, ma très belle douce Valentine. Right? So, and actually it's déjà. I think they hadn't yet dropped the S in the word déjà. Je suis déjà d'amour tanné, ma très douce Valentine. Right? Yeah. It's just such a beautiful sentiment. And it is the earliest Valentine's Day letter that we have. But then we start seeing more and more as the 15th century carries on, and we see more and more evidence of Valentine being someone's Valentine, being not just someone's lover necessarily, but something more than that. So, this recipe, back to the recipe. The recipe talks about mixing this thoroughly together.
Good night, Susan.
Oh, good night, Susan. Sleep well. It talks about mixing it thoroughly together. And, I'm really tempted to go and find a stick. We've got lots of bushes and shrubs outside. Just getting a fresh stick from a shrub and splintering the end next time and seeing what that does to maybe help mix this together a little bit better.
It won't work right now. Everything's dead.
No, it won't. No, it won't. It won't work right now. It's not a good time to do that. But again, yes, I'm using a rubber scraper. No, they did not have rubber scrapers. Fingers were probably the rubber scraper of choice. But I'll be honest, I have a texture thing. I don't like sticking my finger in this texture. Nope. Don't want to do it. That's on me. That's fine. Okay. So I think this is probably as well mixed together as we're going to get this for now. Here it is. Next is our pastry crust. And yes, it tastes very nice. Oh, look, some spilled. I'll just have to lick that up. Oh, for those of you who are worrying about me eating raw egg, I grew up eating raw egg all the time in batter and dough and whatnot and licking the sides of the bowl. That whole idea that you're going to die of food poisoning if you eat some raw egg is if your eggs are that bad, you shouldn't be eating them cooked, right? So the whole salmonella panic, if your eggs come from healthy animals, it's not a concern. Also, if you don't scrub the protective coating off the outside the way they do in the US, it's not a concern. Okay, let's look at our pastry crust. Sorry, I don't want to leave any of this yumminess on this spoon.
Sabrina says, I understand the texture thing. I have to wash my hands so often when cooking anything.
Yeah, the other thing about using my finger to scrape down the bowl, I'd probably just end up eating it. It wouldn't actually go into the batter at all. It would just end up going in my mouth. So, okay, so here is, look at that. Look at how nicely that's firmed up. Here is our Play-Doh, our pastry dough, right? So now we're just going to roll it out, which it doesn't say to roll it out. What it says is make a thin pastry on the bottom of the pan. And they don't mean that you should make the pastry, probably they don't mean they make the pastry in the pan. What that means is make a pastry and put it on the bottom of the pan, right? And we're going to use exactly the same pan, exactly the same clay cooking container in which we melted everything, right? Yay for minimal dirty dishes. My condottiere will be so happy not to have to wash too many things. Okay, so we are going to use a cloth. We're going to put a cloth down here, and I haven't found evidence that they rolled out pastry dough. I know they rolled out pastry dough. I've seen medieval pie depictions of medieval pie rollers, and also we actually have, descriptions of making pastry where it says roll out the dough with those exact words in whatever language was the original language. So we know that they rolled out pastry dough. Yay. What we don't know is, or what I haven't been able to document, is whether or not they rolled it straight on the bench, right? Straight on the countertop, basically, by putting flour down and then, transferring it to the pan, or if they rolled it on a cloth and then transferred it to the pan. I prefer to roll it on a cloth and then transfer it to the pan. Some people, or, some of you might be using parchment paper. That's fine too. I prefer using a cloth because then it's not waste. I prefer minimizing the amount of waste, basically. Need to get some flour, more flour from my fridge. Something else, flour. The second you grind grain or roots or anything, it exposes it to the oxygen in the air and it exposes it to corrupting elements. So you really want to make sure that ideally even flour, even white flour, if you're not going to use it in the next couple of weeks, you should store it in the fridge or the freezer, or if you have a larder, in a cool, dry place, because otherwise it will go rancid. It really will. So that's why I just pulled it out of my larder, my freezer in this case. I'm just going to sprinkle down some flour here. Oh, Handsome, could you grab me a pie roller, please? Or dough roller. I'm going to flour up my hands. I'm going to take our Play-Doh, our pastry dough, and pop it down. Oh, wait, darn it. I folded it in half. No, bad me, no biscuit.
Do you want stick?
Stick. Stick is the authentic version. Pie roller. Basically, giant dowel, right? It's not terribly complicated. Ooh, I see some butter on the inside of this pan. Can't let that go to waste. Yum, yum. Okay. Let's see. Trying to get this so you can see what I'm doing. Okay. I can see that you can see what I'm doing. Flour on top.
Herb Queen says, oh, good to know. I'm going to move my flour now.
Yeah, if you use your flour quickly, it's fine. But I can't tell you how much rancid flour I've had to throw away over the years. It's just, especially, and it, because I forget about it. It ends up in a corner of a cabinet somewhere. I find it a year later. I open it up and I smell it, and you can smell that it's rancid. You do not want to eat rancid things, not even because of the flavor. Rancid things, the reason we have that reaction to rancid smells is because it's not good for us. It's insalubrious to eat rancid oil. It's insalubrious to eat rancid grains. So don't do it. It's not good for you. It will cause inflammation in your body, and it might actually cause other issues depending on the specific substance that has gone off. Right.
Say hi to everyone.
Hello everyone, welcome to my medieval Valentine's Day cooking party. I am making a 15th century Italian cheesecake. We are now just rolling out the pastry dough, which will go on in our torta pan, which is this beautiful clay pan. Need more bench, need more countertop. So cleanliness in medieval kitchens. Medieval kitchens were very clean. And God knows we're probably cleaner than a lot of kitchens I've seen in the modern world. Medieval kitchens were very clean, and they kept them clean in a variety of ways that may surprise some of you. For instance, countertops were washed and salted with cheap salt, not the expensive salt, with salt, what's called gray salt, right? They didn't necessarily understand the action of the gray salt. Microbes were not on their horizon from a scientific perspective, but they definitely understood outcomes. They understood cause and effect. And salt is not only good at antimicrobial effect, but it's abrasive. So you're actually scouring the surface, and it helps actually clean both at the microbial level and the macrobial level. So salt was one way in which they helped keep things clean. They would also wash and salt, and they had soap. They would wash and salt their equipment after it was done, after they cooked, after it was washed. They would scrub it with salt, and then they would put it out in the sunlight for UV treatment. Again, they didn't understand why that all created the best outcomes, but they knew that it did. So medieval kitchens were very clean places. Medieval dairies were clean places. Places where food was prepared were clean. And some of that book, the Ménagier de Paris, the Goodman of Paris that I mentioned in reference to the kinds of steeped beverages that medieval people may have enjoyed. Right. He actually provides a detailed set of instructions for a variety of different kinds of formal dinners that his bride can host. And all of the instructions talk about how to set up the kitchen. She talks about the kind of equipment she's going to need to make sure is available. It specifies buckets, like extra, because it's a bigger dinner than usual. It specifies extra tables as countertops. It specifies extra buckets for dishwashing. So, it also talks about the specific kinds of equipment that the kitchen will need in order to make all this food. So yeah, medieval kitchens were not dirty. They just weren't. And they were very sanitary.
You have to wait before you respond.
Okay.
Finish.
Okay.
No. All medieval folk were dirty and stinky, and soap wasn't invented until the 1800s.
Right. Yeah.
Satirical.
Yeah.
It says I'll see myself out. Mr. QDRLRXCO2X Neo.
Love you, Neo. Stick around, my friend. I like good sarcastic humor.
And Herb Queen says, I heard they would put herbs down under the floor to keep the house clean.
Yeah. So you're talking about rush mats. Yes. So they would sprinkle herbs around and regularly replace them. Herbs that would repel insects, by the way. A lot of insects do not like strong herbal smells. Those smells that those herbs emit is actually a defense mechanism against insects. So they would indeed sprinkle herbs around on the floor, especially if they had rush mats. And that would be a way to keep things fresh smelling and keep things smelling nice and clean, and would also help reduce the amount of insects that they would have to deal with in their home, right? So yeah, the richer people could afford actually to sprinkle spices around. Spices were crazy expensive. So to actually spend money on spices that you would sprinkle on the floor, talk about conspicuous consumption.
Cal Metropolis says wood ash was also easily available and such a good cleaner for metals and grime both.
Yes, absolutely. Wood ash, also known as potash, was basically it's lye, right? Potash is actually alkali. So if you add that to water, it basically becomes a simple form of soap, right? Yeah. So medieval people knew how to keep things clean. They knew how to. In case you all are wondering, I'm not working with wheat flour because I don't eat wheat flour. This is cassava flour, and it's a little bit trickier to work with this kind of crust. So that's why it's just kind of falling apart, despite the fact that I rolled it out neatly.
Are you saying wood ash is a lie?
Wood ash is a lie. Yes. Very funny. You'll be here all week.
Yes, I will.
Yeah. So yeah, there were lots of ways medieval people kept both their spaces clean, themselves clean, that they kept their spaces sweet smelling, that they kept themselves sweet smelling. Someone asked about perfume yesterday, medieval perfume. They didn't have perfume like we would understand perfume, the kind of aerosolized alcohol-based perfume. They didn't have that, but they had oils that were infused with herbs and spices that would smell nice, and they would apply that in their hair. Especially seems to be applied into their hair and possibly on other parts of their body as well. They would wash every day. Every day they washed. They didn't shower every day. They didn't have shower at all. They didn't have showers. There were public bathhouses that people tended to go to about once a week. Right?
At least the Torta is not a lie.
At least the Torta is not a lie. Yeah. There were public bathhouses in towns and cities that people would frequent once a week. On average, and even with just a basin of water and a washcloth, you don't even necessarily need soap. You can keep yourself clean. So it's this idea of the dirty, smelly Middle Ages. It doesn't hold water. And in a post I'm about to make, I'm going to address the topic of raggedy clothing and poverty in the Middle Ages, because the idea of the poor Middle Ages that most people have isn't the Middle Ages, it's Victorian England, right? It's a Dickensian world that they're imagining when they imagine so-called medieval poverty. But that is just not that isn't the kind of poverty that existed in the Middle Ages. It wasn't as profuse as it was in the Industrial Revolution, and it wasn't the same level of depth. People did not, even the poor people didn't walk around in raggedy clothing. So, yeah. Could cities be stinky? Oh, yes. Yes. Pre-modern cities, not just medieval cities, including the great 19th century cities and even the early 20th century cities, smelled really bad. But how many of you have been in New York City in the summer? She smells real bad, right? So yes, medieval cities, many of them probably had a pretty foul smell for many reasons. One of them is that there was a lot of open sewers systems depending on the medieval city in question. Animals everywhere, horses pooping everywhere, just in the streets. And that kind of adds up, not people so much, but the animals. Right? Some people, even though it was illegal, people did throw, in most places it was illegal anyway, people did sometimes throw their waste out of their windows into the streets. They weren't supposed to, it was illegal. Medieval people didn't like it, they didn't like the smell, they didn't want to be covered in someone else's night soil, but it did still happen. So yeah, probably medieval cities didn't smell the freshest on average. Country is a different matter. Probably it actually smelt much better in the country.
Ever hear of pottage? Asked Lucky Shamrock.
Oh yes, pottages are yummy. So for those who don't know what a pottage is basically a medieval stew. The thing about pottage is it was made of whatever was generally available in the season, whatever was in season. So pottage was very seasonal, and that meant that it could change from week to week depending on what herbs and plants were available, what kind of protein they might put into it. Yeah, pottage is delicious. Pottage is basically is medieval stew. Right. Okay. So now this recipe for our here we go. Menudo. Yeah, tripe. Tripe is a thing. Menudo is made from tripe. So yeah, absolutely. Medieval people ate everything. Every part of the animal, nothing went to waste. So yeah, there are recipes for tripe. One of the big differences, Real talk, everyone. One of the big differences between medieval and modern, say, roasts, for instance, medieval stuffings tend to be made with offal, by which I mean you would take a chicken and then you would stuff it with its heart and liver and kidneys, etc., all chopped up and mixed with herbs. And that would be the stuffing that would go inside of the chicken or take any roast. And nearly always those stuffings are made of the offal. I don't eat offal. I don't like it. I don't like the taste. Every year I keep trying again and again and again to eat liver and kidneys, etc., and I just can't get over the flavor. So that's one of the few things about medieval dishes that I don't like. But it makes sense because waste not, want not. Even the rich people couldn't afford to just slaughter all the cows all the time because you needed those cows for other things. Yeah, so that is definitely a big difference between medieval and modern cuisine. But pottages are awesome and they're easy. They would have tasted a little bit different because there would have been more sour. A lot of medieval cuisine involves vinegar or wine in the broth, and so that's going to give it a slightly different flavor profile. But Gardilou. I don't know. Okay, can you explain what Gardilou is? Okay, so we have our pie pan, our torta pan, all lined in a thin pastry on the bottom of the pan. It says, put this mixture over it. Put this mixture on it and cook it slowly over a moderate fire. When it is done, give it a little color. Okay, cook it slowly over a moderate fire. So interestingly, there is nothing in this recipe that says anything about a lid, whether it's a top crust or the lid itself. But
I eat chicken liver for the nutrients. I close my eyes and think of good health.
Yeah, I've tried. I've tried desperately to eat liver. So comment was, I eat chicken liver for the nutrients. I close my eyes and think about good health. I have tried. I've tried hiding liver in like a meatloaf where it's like 10% liver and 90% some other meat, and I still can taste it. It's just, I just can't do it. I've tried. Why can't we invent a liver that doesn't taste like liver? Yeah. Okay, so back to the recipe. This is going to be cooked over a moderate fire. So it's going to be cooked over what?
Gardilou. They would yell that when dumping toilet water out the window, kind of like a head.
Oh, Gardilou. Okay, yeah, got you. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yes, now I know what you're saying. Yep. There's an interesting case in Burgundy about a pardon letter for a man who ends up accidentally killing someone over a chamber pot being dumped over his head. We'll get to that story in a moment. So back to our considerations. So this is going to be cooked on a fire, not in an oven normally. It's in an oven here, so this is less of a concern. But if I were doing this the medieval way, on my hearth, so it's on a moderate fire, it's probably coals, but even still, there's going to be some smoke. If we don't cover this pie with something, it is likely going to absorb the smoky flavor, which is undesirable. A lot of these pans, these pots had lids. We have a lid, right? The top crust that sometimes goes on these pans was not necessarily meant to be on these pies, on these torta, on these pies, was not necessarily meant to be eaten. It was often a cover, and it's supposed to be pretty for the presentation, but often the lid, literally it was called a lid. The pie crust lid would actually be removed for eating because it wasn't going to taste very good, right? So difference between modern pies and medieval pies. In this case, I am doing it in the oven. It's less important if it's covered or not. And even though this recipe doesn't call for it to be covered, I'm going to bet it must be covered because one, he says when it's done, give it a little color on top with a hotter fire. If you don't cook it covered, then it might just get a little color on its own, and that might also lead to an undesirable rate of cooking. But yeah, it's mostly thinking about the fire smoke. I started experimenting with cooking using medieval equipment over coals and fire in 2005. And one of my very early learnings was that if you don't cover your pots, it will taste unpleasantly smoky, like burnt. So yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and transfer our mixture.
It's relaxing to see her. Yahuyo-D. Say hi to Yahuyo-D.
Hi, Yahuyo. Hello, Yahuyo D. Welcome to my medieval cooking party. Just pouring / scraping with my very not medieval rubber scraper into my pastry crust, my thin pastry, it's called. And the reason it calls for a thin pastry is because in this era, there are some pies, some torts, where you actually have a thick pastry and the pastry is the baking dish. So you don't have a pie pan like this, the pastry becomes the baking dish. So that is also probably part of the reason that it specifies a thin crust, to make sure everyone understands that we're not talking about the kind of pastry crust that needs to stand on its own and withstand directly the rigors of direct heat and direct cooking. Okay, so here we have that. It's all mixed in. It is a little curdly. Again, I'm wondering what would happen if I actually went ahead and decided to use that glare mixing splinter stick, if that would create a more even composition, but we'll see what happens when it bakes. So now we have to cook it slowly over a moderate fire. So this means low heat. And there's a very good reason for that. How many of you have accidentally baked a cheesecake at too high a heat? Right, so what will happen is the proteins in the eggs will seize. Heat, thermal acceleration, heat actually causes the protein strands to bind in on themselves. This is what causes meat patties to actually harden, right? Because the heat is actually causing the meat proteins to coagulate, to curl about themselves, and that's why it gets tighter and denser. Low heat prevents that from happening. A low, gentle heat, the lower the heat, the less of that coagulation you have. So that means it will create a creamier, softer texture if we do this over a low heat for longer than over a high heat and faster. So it's not just a question of cooking time, it's a question of the ultimate outcome of your texture. And this recipe is sophisticated in that it specifies that it must be over a slowly cooked, over a moderate fire, and that is going to ultimately result in a creamy texture versus something that you could use to play basketball or any given court sport. Right, okay, so we're gonna go ahead and put this in the oven.
Was it only nobles that ate a crusted pie?
What was the question?
Was it only nobles that ate a crusted pie?
Was it only nobles that ate a crusted pie? No, I don't think so. I'm pretty certain, no, absolutely not. People in the middle class ate crusted pies, and we have depictions of bakers in towns with portable ovens. Actually, it's an oven on a cart, and they're actually going through the town, and people are bringing out their pies to them to be baked. So those are not, in a town, in your average regular town, it's not going to be aristocrats sending their pies. It's going to be townspeople. Right, so no, it's not just aristocrats who get crusted pies. And the later you get in medieval society, the more likely you are to have peasants who can afford very nice things. Peasant is not a socioeconomic class, it's a job description. So we have rich peasants and we have very poor peasants, just like we have rich skinners, members of the skinning craft, and we have poor skinners. So, in each of these different professions, there's kind of a breadth of socioeconomic options, from poor to the point of being homeless, all the way up to so wealthy that there are sumptuary laws being passed to keep the skinners from dressing like they're knights, or keep the knights from dressing like they're dukes, right? So no, it's not just the aristocrats who have crusted pies. Now, on the lower end, I would probably suggest that you've just got flour and water on the lower end of the spectrum for your crust, and that crust might not be as fine and it might not be so yummy to eat. But no, we know that crusted pies are a thing across society, especially because at the lower echelons, you're less likely to be able to afford a pan that's just for baking your pies. And so your crust becomes not only a foodstuff, but it also becomes the baking dish. Now, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. Okay, so now this is going to bake because it's a low heat. So just so you all know, I've got my hearth set at 150 degrees centigrade. So that's a pretty low temperature. And this is going to take a while. This is probably going to take an hour or more to cook. So clearly we're not just going to live stream for the full time. But I will tell you now the story about a couple of fun Valentine's Day stories. I want one Valentine's Day story, one chamber pot story. Okay, so one and one. Okay, so the Valentine's Day story there's two Valentine's Day stories and one chamber pot story. The Valentine's Day story, the oldest English Valentine's letter is actually Marjorie Brew's to John Paston III from about 1477. And apparently her family, so John Paston III, he's part of this up and coming minor gentry family that has made good throughout the 100 Years' War through trading with especially commerce in Flanders through the wool trade. And they're actually finally getting into parliament. They're being elected as MPs, right? They're serving in the upper levels of the households of dukes and earls. So they're an up and coming family. And they're gaining in power. And hundreds of their letters have survived from the 15th century, which is why we know so much about them. Well, apparently a marriage had been arranged between Marjorie Brew's, a middle class woman of the middle class, and John Paston, a member of the increasingly powerful Paston clan. Apparently her family fell on hard times, and so she was not going to be able to bring as much financial benefit to the marriage table, as it were. And so he actually starts making noise about cutting off, their engagement. So she writes him this Valentine's Day letter in which she addresses him as my right well beloved Valentine. And then she goes on to explain to him exactly why he shouldn't cut off the marriage. And she basically says, paraphrasing, if you had half the wealth that you currently have, I would still marry you. Right? Now, is that true? Maybe, maybe not. But she says that anyway. Her mother, actually, Elizabeth, comes to the rescue. Her mother is a very savvy, wily woman. She actually arranges a meeting between the families, including Marjorie and John. And so ultimately she brings the marriage to fruition through clever negotiations. But yeah, that's one of the earliest Valentines is basically a woman trying to convince a man to not cut off their engagement because she's too poor. So it's maybe not as romantic as all that. But the letter she writes him does seem to be full of affection, genuine affection. And apparently, according to some of the other correspondence, there was actual affection. It wasn't just a socioeconomic matter, but that definitely played into it. Welcome to my medieval cooking party. We now have a cheesecake in the oven. And so I'm just sharing some fun medieval episodes involving Valentine's Day and then one involving a chamber pot. And if you're enjoying, please like and subscribe. Double tap the screen to like if you're on a mobile device. Okay, so that is the earliest English Valentine that has survived anyway. The chamber pot incident. So a lesser known source of, and I'm just rolling out this dough. I'm going to bake this up and then it's going to be yummy. And I'm going to just add some extra butter in and laminate the layers. But anyway, one of a very interesting source of the way people actually lived their lives, the kinds of interactions that people had on a daily basis, is an unexpected one. And it's one that just came to my attention very recently. Pardon letters. A pardon letter is literally a pardon from a ruler or a court forgiving someone for a crime, pardoning them of their crimes. But part of this pardoning process was to actually describe in detail the crime, the interactions, the lead up to the crime itself, and the aftermath. So these pardon letters are actually very detailed. And so they actually give us a window into interactions in daily medieval life that we might otherwise miss because chroniclers aren't going to write about this. They're writing about the big events of history generally, right? But this is the daily life events of history. So the pardon letters from the Duchy of Burgundy, many of them have survived. And there's a book that just got published containing these pardon letters. And I'm laminating the dough. In case you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm smearing dough in between, or butter in between the layers of the dough to laminate it. And this is going to make it crispier and flakier, more like a modern crust. And then I'm going to roll it out and bake it, and it will make a yummy snack. Anyway, these pardon letters are really fascinating. I have a whole book of pardon letters. I think it's in the back room, maybe. One of the pardon letters involved a chamber pot incident in one of the Flemish towns in the Duchy of Burgundy. I think it was Ypres, but don't hold me to that. The basic course of events are that the daughter of the daughter in a household, the man who owned the home, she was apparently clearing out the chamber pots, and she broke the law. So the law in most towns was you weren't supposed to throw the chamber pots out the window. You were supposed to dispose of them in the cesspit, right? Every home had a cesspit. You were supposed to throw it out there, but that would mean that you had to carry it down the stairs, sloshing possibly, carry it out into the courtyard, and then dispose of it that way. So much easier just to open the shutters and dump the chamber pot out in the street. At this time, streets were mostly not paved in Europe. Most streets were not paved. So it was muddy. It would eventually get churned into the mud and absorbed, right? Or not necessarily muddy, but it was dirt, right? Dirt streets. It was wet as muddy. It would eventually get absorbed by the dirt and churned into the street. So no harm, no foul, except it was foul. It was illegal. So this daughter goes to apparently dispose of the chamber pot in the way you weren't supposed to, and it lands on this man who is standing below. And he gets real angry, and he calls her down to him, or enters her home and interacts with her, and apparently he smacks her. And that's actually not the problem. The father actually agrees with his actions and says, yes, you had every right to do that. She misconducted herself. It was entirely worthy of the smack you gave her. But apparently, some of her relatives take umbrage to this, and this leads to a series of interactions in which the man who's had the chamber pot dumped on him eventually kills one of her relatives in an exchange. He doesn't die immediately. He dies of his wounds days later, and so this man gets arrested and he gets convicted of murder. Well, he, of course, appeals to the Duke's mercy. This would have been in the era of Charles the Bold. He appeals to the Duke's mercy, and Charles actually forgives him and issues him a pardon. But it's not as all nice as it is. The people who applied for pardons, they had to pay for the administration fees. There were administration fees, and they usually had to pay some kind of fine in lieu of the sentence that they received. Right. So yeah, the chamber pot incident that led almost to an execution ultimately.
Will this be similar to a Basque cheesecake?
Will this be similar to a Basque cheesecake? This cheesecake that we have in the oven? Maybe. It seems similar to the recipe for a Basque cheesecake. We will find out. We will see how it comes out. I think we'll see. We'll see how it comes out. I have some ideas I think it's going to be not quite as creamy. It will not be as sweet. It will definitely not be as sweet. This is going to be a very lightly sweet thing. Now, that being said, at the very end, after it comes out, we're supposed to when it's almost done, we're supposed to give it a little color on top with a hotter fire, which is why I'm pretty certain that it should be baked with a cover on. So I should probably put the cover on. Because then you can put coals on top. You can put hotter coals on top, and that will create more heat at the top, and then it will give it a little more color. And then, when it looks done, take it out and put rose water and sugar on top and serve it. So rose water is the vanilla extract of the Middle Ages. That is the primary flavor enhancer, and it is used heavily as a final garnish in a lot of sweet dishes. And then you're also supposed to put sugar on top. We don't know how much sugar, but it'll make it a little bit sweeter. I think the primary thing, though, that one of the reasons it's the last thing you do is so that people can see that there is sugar on top. Conspicuous consumption, my friends. So I'm pretty certain that's why it's not sprinkled on like in the middle of baking, because if it's sprinkled on in the middle of baking, no one will see the sugar. But if you apply it at the very end, just before serving, everyone can admire, oh my goodness, look at all this white gold all over this pie. I'm gonna go ahead and put the lid on. So yeah, I think it will come out similar to a Basque cheesecake, but not entirely because it has butter in it. And I don't think Basque cheesecakes have butter in them. I can already see that the butter is actually kind of melted and is like the butter oil is coming up to the top in little beads. So we'll see. We'll see. Next time I'm going to try one. I want to get a bigger mortar. But next time I'm definitely going to try the stick thing where I actually get a stick, fray the edges so that it works more like a whisk, and see if that helps. Okay, so that was the chamber pot incident, and that was one of our Valentine's Day things. Then, speaking of unpleasant court cases, the Valentine's Day court case. So I mentioned this yesterday, but I thought I'd mention it again because we have different viewers or more viewers. So in 1486, there is a situation in which a lady and a man supposedly become engaged and get married on Valentine's Day. And part of the case revolves entirely around him admitting that, saying in front of witnesses that this lady, his name was John Ferris, her name was Alice, that Alice was his Valentine. And then they apparently exchange vows where he says, I want you to be my hereto to be my wife and my Valentine forever, according to witnesses. He says that. This is 1486 in England. And she then says, I consent to be your Valentine and to be your wife, and so I plight my troth to you. Right? So basically, they have a wedding ceremony right there in the hall of his employer. He's employed in the house of this relatively well-heeled merchant. And apparently everyone drinks ale and they toast the couple. Well, 2 years later, there's a case that springs up where he is contending that there was never any such marriage or any such wedding and therefore no marriage. And she's contending that there was. And why does this matter? Because he's had the banns read and is trying to arrange a new marriage. And so she's claiming that that would be bigamous because he's already married. So yeah, it's this case where, again, the Valentine is not as sweet as it sounds. And it sounds like he was just using the claim of you're my Valentine to probably have some fun time with her and maybe have some protracted fun time until he found someone who was a better economic match. Having found this better economic match, he tried to just conveniently claim this other marriage had never existed. And this is unfortunately something that happens pretty frequently in medieval Europe, where a man and a woman have a common law marriage where they're not married in the church or anything like that. And in fact, in this time, it wasn't common for people to be married in the church. It wasn't common at all. And they didn't often celebrate a mass as part of their marriage. It was a common law thing, and it was an observed and witnessed occasion, and then it was done, right? But this leads to the issue of usually the husband saying, oh, that never happened. I would like to marry this other woman who has this great dowry. You know, we have the exact same thing happens in Italy, in Florence. We have a whole book about this, just this one case where this woman spends a goodly amount of time getting her marriage acknowledged as being valid. And then he ultimately appeals to his contacts in the papal curia to ultimately get it overturned. Yeah. Typical case of rich bastards always getting their way. Yeah. So there's no cream in this cheesecake. So welcome to my medieval sewing party. I know we were just talking about duplicitous bastards trying to cast off a marriage, but it's all in the fun of Valentine's Day. But there does seem to have been this practice of identifying someone as your Valentine. And that starts in the 15th century. And then by the time we get to Shakespeare, right, Hamlet has this whole thing about Ophelia having been Hamlet's Valentine, supposedly. She sings this after she goes mad because Hamlet has murdered her father and repudiated her, right? She goes mad, and one of the songs she sings is actually autobiographical, but it also gives us an idea about how young men especially, seem to use the concept of my Valentine, and therefore I plight you I plight my troth to you and you will be my wife, as just a way to get into bed with a young woman and then to repudiate her afterwards once he's had his fun, right? Because remember, Ophelia actually sings, the song she sings is really sad and disturbing. She says, today is St. Valentine's Day, all in the morn betime, and I am made at your window to be your Valentine. So up he rose and donned his clothes and dooped the chamber door, let in the maid, that out a maid ne'er departed more. Right, so she sings that in her madness, and it's not accidental. She's saying what happened with Hamlet, right? So it seems that this was it was a common thing, it was a common concept, and it was a common practice that men would use this idea of being my Valentine to get what they wanted as long as they wanted it, and then try to use the gaps in the system to upgrade when they encountered an upgradable option. Players back then, even in the day. Yeah, 100%. Oh, Misha makes. Thank you. Appreciate that. Misha, lovely to see you again. Yeah. Boo for that guy. Yeah, what other comments have I missed?
Oh, I lost the channel for some reason.
Oh.
I'm trying to reconnect. But somebody liked the word umbrage. Bring it back. Umbrage,
yes. Umbrage. Umbrage for the win, baby. It's one of my favorite words. Just sounds so nice, umbrage.
What did the bride's family pay?
Wouldn't the bride's family pay for what?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
Talking about money and stuff there.
Right. So here's the thing. In the lower classes, on the lower end of the socioeconomic classes, on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum in the Middle Ages, it wasn't necessarily, people didn't necessarily have money for a dowry, right? And that is one of the reasons that we actually have a lot of single women in medieval Europe, especially after the Black Death, after the Great Die-Off, right? Because they can't afford to marry, because they have to bring something to the table. And if they don't bring something to the table, then they don't get married, right? So, it's a problem. So if, Alice was a servant, for instance, in this case, Alice was a servant. John Ferris was a skinner, right? He comes from a family of skinners. That's a profession. That's a decent earning profession. She is just a servant. She is a servant. She's nobody, as far as we can tell, based on the witnesses that were called. She is not the daughter of a merchant or an artisan, right? So she is lower than he is. She doesn't bring anything to the table, really. He does. So, what he gets out of it, for a while anyway, is obviously enjoyment. And then when he finds an opportunity to boost his socioeconomic standing, he goes to take it. So yeah, it's that's the problem in a lot of cases with these young women. These women in general, is that they don't bring anything to the table, and the man they've connected with could bring something to the table. So if he can bring something to the table, then he can also expect to get something equal in return. Yeah. Oh, Kay Meeks, one of my channel members. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, so in the oven, we have our cheesecake. We're definitely not going to stream for the next hour or two for it to actually bake. So again, I will be taking pictures and video once it comes out. I'll film the tasting of it. Hopefully that will happen tonight. And we'll talk about what went right and wrong and our lessons learned. In general, some of the things we already learned in making this torta bianca. We've learned that we should absolutely cream the butter first before adding it to the mixture, and that would just involve, in this case, in the case of medieval creaming, it would involve just using a wooden spoon in a bowl, but still. I was also thinking a way to get the butter better integrated would be maybe to add the milk. I would actually inverse some of this. I would add the butter to the cheese, probably, and mix the butter and cheese together before we add any of the liquids. And then mix those really together thoroughly. And then the sugar will actually help mix it, because the sugar is granulated, and therefore it's got a kind of, it'll have a mixing effect. It will help mix it better when the sugar is still granulated, when it's added to the cheese and the butter together. So I would change that a little bit more. And then I would add the milk and then the cheese. So yeah, we'll change some things about the process for the next time. I'm still confident that this will at least turn out tasty. because there's not going to be any weird interaction between Parmesan cheese and cherries. No pie with 4 and 20 blackbirds then. Today, no, but yes, there is a recipe in the Neapolitan collection for a pie involving live birds. That is a real thing. They really did that, but it was a trick. It was a party trick. You weren't supposed to eat the pie with 4 and 20 blackbirds, right? You're just supposed to bring it this giant pie, right? And it's going to be huge. It's going to be really, really big. You're going to bring this giant pie in. You're going to cut open the crust, and then the birds are going to fly out, and everyone's going to say, oh, why, how wonderful. You're not going to eat the pie. The birds will have pooped in the pie. You're not going to eat the crust. You're not going to eat the pie. But it was a great party trick. But they had lots of party tricks. This cookbook, the Neapolitan recipe collection, has some serious chemistry in it. There are instructions, step-by-step detailed instructions and recipe for how to make a peacock that spits fire.
No.
I just got told no. But it's pretty dangerous. It involves some pretty dangerous, highly flammable chemicals. Let me see if I can find the peacock that spits fire here. Let's see, goat and kid in other ways. Yeah, it's got some really great party tricks. This cookbook does. May herb dish, eggs on it. It's got a bunch of egg dishes too, which are really nice. Ravioli pasta was absolutely a medieval thing. For those who think that pasta was invented in Asia and came to Europe, no, it seems to have been parallel development. Just like dumplings, everyone seems to have a dumpling. Everyone seems to have some kind of pie. Everyone has some kind of roast, right? These are kind of universal concepts. Oh, here's a recipe for fake butter. Right, so some of you who are familiar with medieval practices know that there are Lenten times, fasting days where you're not, ember days where you're not supposed to eat meat or animal products. And so they actually have a recipe for turning almond milk into butter, into a spread that you can put on your bread. Get a pound and a half of blanched, well-ground almonds, half a beaker of good rose water, strain the almonds. And if that rose water is not enough, use however much you need so that the amount of almonds can be strained. The almond milk will bind, so that the almond milk will bind well. Get a little starch, a little saffron if you want, and fine sugar. Lay this mixture into a mold as if it were butter, and then like that, it is good to eat. I actually plan on playing with some of these. There's different recipes for that, for turning almond milk into basically almond milk butter. Wow, where is that recipe? It is so fun. It's pretty crazy, and it's scary a little bit. Oh, is it over here? Oh, yes, here it is. Haha. Redressed peacocks that seem living and how to make them breathe fire through their mouth. Here we go. You should first kill the peacock with a feather, driving it upon its head, or else drain its blood from under its throat as with a pig. But it's better to take out its tongue and then to slice it under its body, that is, from the top of its breast to its tail, slicing only the skin and removing it gently so that it is not damaged. This is after it's dead, by the way, in case you're wondering. When you have skinned it, pull the skin back right up to the head, then cut away the head, which will remain attached to the skin. Do the same with the legs and likewise the tail, taking out the leg bones so that the iron which will make the peacock stand up will not be seen. Then take the skinned carcass and set it to roast stuck with lardons. Lardons is basically pork fat. So you basically cover the thing. You actually pin pork fat all throughout it so that the fat actually keeps the flesh nice and moist and tasty. Or else baste it with grease often enough that it will not burn, and stick it with whole cloves, which will add lovely flavor. And fill it with the piglet stuffing, which is recipe 63, but without the garlic. What? No, why are we even eating this if it doesn't have garlic? I disagree with that greatly, sir. Cook it gently so that its neck does not burn. If the neck should get too much heat, cover it with a damp cloth. And when it is cooked, take it down and redress it in its skin, whose inside you have in the meanwhile coated with salt and cinnamon and other spices. Then, when you have put its skin back on, get an apparatus of iron driven into a large cutting board and shove this iron through its feet and legs so that it cannot be seen. In this way, the peacock will be standing so that it will seem to be alive. And to make it breathe fire through its mouth, here we go. Get a little camphor, with a little fine cotton wool around it, and put this into the peacock's beak and soak it with a little aquavita. That is a distilled alcohol, by the way. Or else with a little fumy old wine that is volatile. And when you want to serve it, set fire to the cotton wool. In this way, it will breathe fire for a long time. And to make it more magnificent, you can even cover the peacock with gold leaf and then cover it with its skin. The same can be done with pheasants, cranes, geese, and other large birds. So yeah, I was apparently wrong. Apparently in the 15th century kitchen, I'd forgotten about the aquavita. They do have aquavita, but again, it is not being used in a food application. It is being used to create an effect. So yeah, anyone who wants to get really crazy at their next medieval feast, you have an option for a fire-breathing bird. But there's, I mean, it's amazingly how detailed these instructions are. And the idea of rubbing the skin with spices to give it more flavor, that's a really interesting one. Yep. Fabulous. We need more recipes with fire as part of the presentation. Yeah, 100%. Camphor and aquavita for the win. So yeah, this book, the Neapolitan Recipe Collection, it's a very interesting read, just to see some of the very detailed descriptions. Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things. Under the meat section, they actually have pies as well. They have meat pies here. One of them is has some very interesting ingredients. A pie of coxcombs with testicles. So when I say they didn't waste anything, I meant it. Get combs and cut them into 3 and livers into 4 and leave the testicles whole. Right? Get a little lardo, cut it very small, but do not pound it. Get 3 ounces of veal fat and pound it well. Veal or beef marrow would be better. And then, this is the interesting thing, get 30 dry sour cherries, cinnamon, ginger, plenty of sugar. Mix all that together. Make a good pie, make a good crust, and bake it in the oven. And make its crust as is used in pies. Alternatively, put it in a pan, which means you don't need a crust. When it is cooked, get an egg yolk, verjuice, and saffron, mix it together, and put all that into the pie and heat it again, then take it out. So yeah, apparently there is a culinary use for coxcombs and their testicles.
There's a use for the testicles.
And also the livers, and you shouldn't chop the testicles up. You should leave them whole. The mixture, mixing all that with the sour dried cherries and cinnamon and ginger and plenty of sugar, yeah, I think this might be one of the more exotic pies I've seen in a medieval recipe collection relative to modern standards.
Vaccinator 1 is back.
Vaccinator 1, welcome back, my friend. Yeah, I don't know if you heard the reading of the pie of coxcombs and testicles.
From the Italian Americans, thank you for recipes like this. It's important to understand where our culinary culture comes from.
Yeah, was that Vaccinator? Yeah. Thank you, Vaccinator. Yeah. So one of the things I like about doing these medieval cooking sessions, with European food in particular, is because people have a very fixed idea about what Italian cuisine is, what Spanish cuisine is, what English cuisine is now. But these medieval cookbooks show just how different it was, completely different. There's not a single recipe with tomatoes, because tomatoes are part of the Columbian Exchange and don't even start getting eaten regularly in Europe until the 18th century. So some of the key flavors, some of the key ingredients that people now associate with, for instance, Italian cooking, aren't there at all. But on the other hand, there are certain similarities that have remained unchanged. For instance, pasta. There are so many pasta recipes in these Italian cookbooks. For instance, ravioli were absolutely a going concern in 15th century Italy, 14th and 15th century Italy. Different kinds of, tagliatelle and macaroni even. Right, so here's a ravioli recipe. Here's a ravioli recipe from Naples, so a Neapolitan recipe. Get 1.5 pounds of aged cheese and a little new creamy cheese, so definitely creamy, cream cheese, and 1 pound of pork belly, love the pork belly, or loin of veal that should be boiled until well cooked. Then grind it up. Get well ground fragrant herbs, pepper, cloves, ginger, and saffron, adding in a well ground breast of capon, and mix all of this together. Make a thin dough and wrap nut-sized amounts of the mixture in it. Set these ravioli to cook in the fat broth of a capon or some other good meat with a little saffron. Let them boil for half an hour, then dish them out, garnishing them with a mixture of grated cheese and good spices. Doesn't that sound absolutely delicious? I mean, first off, the mixture of an aged cheese plus the creamy cream cheese, right? That's going to give you flavor and texture that's really desirable. Pork belly, oh yes, please. Pork belly is proof that God loves us. And that's all ground together, and we've got herbs and cloves and ginger and saffron. We've got capon. Capon is a castrated chicken, castrated male chicken, so a castrated rooster, so they get nice and fat. And all of that mixed together, and then it, nut-sized amounts. I have to check and see what the Italian is. I'm going to probably assume walnut-sized amounts. So all these yummy, really super flavorful ravioli, it's meat and cheese together, right? How often do you see meat and cheese ravioli in the modern world?
Say hi to Michia Makes.
Michia, she was there already. Did she come back?
I don't know.
Oh.
She says nothing says romance like a transactional relationship.
Yeah.
Definitely need more recipes with fire as part of the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely need more recipes with fire. You're behind in the comments. You might need to catch up to the live stream.
Okay, Meeks just said definitely makes me hungry. Whereas Lucky Shamrock says medieval dishes would make me vegetarian.
Really? Oh. Why? Actually, it's a good question. Why would medieval dishes make you vegetarian? I'm interested. I mean, obviously, not all medieval dishes are coxcombs and testicles. But you know what I love about almost all of the medieval ravioli recipes that I read, or pasta recipes, they involve cooking them in a fat broth. So what that means is that's a bone broth, right? That usually involves some of the fat in the connective tissue. So it's a very flavorful, rich broth, and that is going to infuse your ravioli with flavor. Modern ravioli are mostly only cooked in just water, but not in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, they're cooked in a flavorful broth that's going to infuse them with the flavor enhancing fat from the broth and all the different spices and herbs that were used to make that broth. So it's going to be extra delicious. And then of course the broth after cooking those ravioli in it will probably also be good because of all the spices and flavors coming from the ravioli themselves. So yeah, it's very interesting how some of these techniques have persevered and others have been forgotten. Right, here's white ravioli. Get a good fresh buffalo cheese. I love buffalo cheese. Who likes buffalo cheese? I love buffalo cheese. So delicious. Get a good fresh buffalo cheese, grind it up thoroughly, and while grinding, add in a little butter, ginger, and cinnamon. And for basically the ratio is for one to one. One cheese, add 3 well-beaten egg whites and a decent amount of sugar. Obviously, buffalo cheese or the balls, right? They have kind of a standardish size. So I guess for one buffalo cheese, add 3 egg whites.
They're not the balls of the buffalo.
They're not the balls of the buffalo.
Oh, okay.
They're not. 3 beaten egg whites and a decent amount of sugar. Mix everything together. Shape it into ravioli the length and thickness of a finger. Coat them with good flour. And note that these ravioli are made without dough. Interesting. Boil them gently so that they do not fall apart. When they begin to boil, remove them and set them on dishes with sugar and cinnamon. You can make them yellow with saffron. So it's a completely different flavor profile, right? Sugar also here is being used like salt. So it's not a lot of sugar, right? It's just enough to make the flavors pop. Cinnamon is kind of similarly here. Right, but what's interesting about these is how these ravioli have no dough whatsoever. They're made without dough. So you're actually basically making finger-shaped cheese meatballs. Cheese balls. You're making finger-shaped cheese balls, right? And that's coating them with the flour is basically what kind of helps them adhere together. So, I mean, can you imagine a doughless ravioli? Yeah. So yeah, there's just so many interesting recipes that would be really tasty now. Oh, here, who of you like macaroni? Macaroni and cheese, of course, is a very, very modern thing. Well, here are 2 recipes for macaroni. This one I think is going to sound very familiar. Sicilian macaroni. Make a dough of the whitest flour, 1 egg white and rose water, and you should be preparing 2 plates of it. Put in only 2 or 3 egg yolks. Make this dough quite tough and make small round sticks of it, a hand's width in length and the thickness of a straw. Get a fine iron rod, a hand's width in length and the thickness of a cord. Set it on a pastry stick and give them a roll with both hands on the table. Then draw out the rod and you will have the macaroni hollowed through the middle. These macaroni should dry in the sun and can be kept for 2 or 3 years. Cook them in water or a good meat broth. Garnish them with grated cheese when you set them out on plates with fresh butter and mild spices. Boil them gently for 1 hour. Right? So this is actually a detailed enough set of instructions. It even talks about the equipment, right? You have a rod, a fine iron rod, a hand's width in length, right? And the thickness of a cord, so not very thick at all, and set it on a pastry stick. And I suspect that the pastry stick is probably, I have to look at the Italian to see what they mean by a pastry stick. Give them a roll. I think they mean set it on the pastry and give them a roll with both hands on the table, and then draw out the rod and you will have the macaroni hollowed through. So yeah, it's literally step-by-step instructions on how to make macaroni that would look very similar to today's. The only difference is it doesn't say anything about curving them. These aren't curved macaroni. These are Sicilian style, right? So these are straight macaroni, but the cord, this iron, it's only a hand's width, right? So it's only this long. So each of these macaroni are going to be about that long. So it's actually, a pretty okay length for consumption. And it tells you that you can dry them in the sun and that they're good for 2 to 3 years. And again, it suggests you should cook them in a good meat broth, but that you garnish them with cheese and with fresh butter and mild spices. That is basically proto macaroni and cheese. Right? It's not a sauce, but it's cheese and it's butter. It's proto macaroni sauce and cheese. Okay, everyone.
They had saffron?
Yes. Good question. They had saffron. Yes. Saffron is one of the most expensive spices in medieval Europe. It was sometimes worth its weight in gold. Saffron actually comes originally from Persia, apparently, but it was cultivated heavily in Spain, in the Iberian Peninsula, because the conditions are very good for it. So yeah, saffron, it is a luxury item, but they had it and they used it as often as they could. It's one of the ways to make a beautiful yellow food coloring. So that's why it's used in a lot of dishes. Sometimes it's used for flavor, but more often than not, it's as much about the beautiful color as it is about the flavor. Yeah. Okay, everyone. Any final questions about medieval cookery or anything we've discussed today? I will be posting pictures and video once the final Torta bianca comes out. And of course, we'll be doing another medieval cooking party next week. Questions?
Boil for 1 hour? That seems like a lot.
Yeah, so that is a very good question. Oh, darn it, where did it go? Someone actually tried this, boiling it for an hour. Where did it go? It's half an hour, I think.
Half an hour or an hour.
Okay. A couple of things about time in the Middle Ages is not like time now. Darn it. Darn it. I closed the book. I'll never find that recipe again. So there it is. Okay. Oh, it does say an hour. Okay. So an hour is not necessarily an hour. Medieval timekeeping is different than modern timekeeping. And Naples is further south, but it's still not actually close enough to the equator that an hour would always be an hour, because the day and the night were divided up each into 12 equal hours. And sometimes of the year, a day is shorter, and sometimes of the year, a day is longer, but the length of the hour, therefore, changes based on the time of year. So if this is a winter hour, then it's shorter. And if it's a summer hour, then it's longer. So saying boil them gently for an hour is not necessarily useful, unless they're using a sand clock or a water clock. Or they're actually basing it on an hour from a mechanical clock, right? So there's different kinds of hours in the 15th century. So it does say boil it gently. So, which is a little bit It's like if it's boiling, it's boiling. Let me see if I can find the original Italian because it might not mean boil. It might just mean cook. It's one of the problems is that people don't necessarily understand words in their yeah, fali buliri. Yeah, that probably does mean boil. But it does say adagio. So yeah, that does seem a long time. Someone commented though that this is going to result, it's still edible. Someone actually experimented. I have a friend who experimented with this. She actually made this pasta and cooked it for an hour. What it means is it's not al dente. It's a different texture, right? We're used to al dente pasta. This does not create an al dente pasta. It creates a spongier kind of pasta, but it makes it very easy to basically cut it with a spoon, right? Because it's long. Remember, it's the width of your hand, the length of the width of your hand. So this actually made it so that it was no problem to easily eat it with a spoon, according to our observations. And it made it spongier and sort of fuller. But there's another detail here. You want this dough to be quite tough, right? It says that make this dough quite tough. So that might be another reason that it needs to be cooked for longer, because if you're making it tough, you're really building that gluten structure up. To make it tough is through the kneading, right? The process, the more you knead the dough, the tougher it gets. So to make it quite tough is going to build a much tighter gluten structure. So for that reason, you might actually have to boil it longer, right? I don't eat gluten anymore, so I don't eat wheat-based products anymore, so I don't bake or cook with wheat anymore. But back in my wheat cooking days, this is something you learned, is that, the more you mechanically abuse wheat flour, once it's had moisture added to it, this tougher it gets. And so it could be that making it really, really tough means it needs to cook for longer. But also that they're expecting a different texture. We want al dente. That isn't necessarily what medieval people wanted. Yeah, especially if you think about it. They're cooking those ravioli for half an hour, and that's in part to cook the meat inside of them. But the ravioli dough isn't that thick, so that's a long time even for us for ravioli. So yeah, it'd be interesting to test that out and see what happens. Okay, everyone, are there any final questions? Oh, Ace Ventura, welcome. Thank you. Appreciate that. Welcome to my community. For those who are joining more recently, welcome to my medieval cooking party Valentine's Day special. I am the creative Contessa, and today we have been experimenting with making a torta bianca, a white pie, basically white cheesecake from the mid 15th century from Naples. I will be posting pictures and video of the final product, and I'll be writing up the recipe and sharing that with my people on Discord. I'd like to thank my channel members and my patrons for supporting my work. I'd like to thank all of you who leave me gifts. Thank you, Misha, and super chats. If you would like to support my medieval living history explorations and sharing of that knowledge, consider becoming a patron or a channel member. Comes with a whole host of perks, including access to entire tutorials, videos that I don't share with everyone else, ad-free videos, and also my private Creative Contessa Discord server. If you had any questions and I didn't get to them, please pop them in the comments. I will absolutely answer them. And I'll just check one more time. Oh, Sabrina, thank you. I appreciate that. Lucky Shamrock, thank you for joining us today. Tomorrow I will be doing probably a medieval storytime live stream at roughly about the same time. So if you would like to hear me read to you various original accounts and stories from the Middle Ages, not about the Middle Ages, but from the Middle Ages, and then we will also discuss the context and the history and the subtext and the meaning behind them, then feel free to join in on that medieval storytime tomorrow. Otherwise, until next time, everyone, may your adventures in history be creative. Until then, bye, everyone.
Bye.